let's rock and roll.
Sorry, Jay.
All right.
Yeah, that's a handsome.
Good evening and welcome to the January 18th, 2023 meeting of the City of Summit Zoning Board of Adjustment. My name is Stephen Spur and I am chairman of the Summit Zoning Board. In accordance with New Jersey Statute 10:4-10, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to a newspaper of record and has been posted here in City Hall. This meeting is a judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues that are relevant to what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and a quorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. For the benefit of the interested public, this meeting is being live streamed to the city's YouTube page and also broadcast on Summit's government channel, which is Comcast 34 and Verizon channel 30. Please note that fire exits are to my right, your left, and at the back of the room where you entered. The city has a listening system to assist the hearing impaired. If anyone needs hearing assistance, please obtain the system here at the dais and return it after our meeting. Andy Ball is the zoning board's attorney. He will advise board members on matters of law and is the key interface with an applicant's attorney. Mr. Ball does not vote on the applications. Stephanie Sulios is a city employee and is the zoning board secretary. Ms. Sulios assists applicants with the preparation of their applications, planning our agendas, and keeping our meeting minutes. Ms. Sulios also does not vote on the applications. Our board consists of 7 regular members and up to 4 alternates. All members can participate in the hearings tonight, but a maximum of 7 can vote. Most applications require a simple majority to be approved. Some applications require 5 affirmative votes to be approved. You'll be told which majority will be required before we begin our deliberations. Ms. Sulios, will you please call the roll of the members?
Sure. Chairman Spar?
Here.
Vice Chairman Steiner?
Here.
Ms. Newell? Here. Mr. Gonzalez?
Here.
Mr. Mullen is excused this evening. Mr. Millay?
Here.
Mr. Loikitz is excused this evening. Ms. Choate?
Here.
Ms. Sager is excused this evening. Mr. Feskins?
Here.
Mr. Yuko?
Here.
You have a quorum. You may proceed.
Great. We generally hear the applications in the order they are listed on the agenda. We try to have each hearing last no more than 30 minutes, but we do understand that some applications are too complex to be heard within that time frame. Each hearing begins with the applicant or their attorney giving an overview of the application and the variances that are required. We then hear from any expert witnesses the applicant may have to help explain the application and why the variances are needed. The board members may ask questions of the applicant, their attorney, and the expert witnesses. Once the board professionals and board members have completed the questioning, the public will have an opportunity to ask questions. This is not the time to tell us what you think about this application. That opportunity comes at the end of a hearing. Before you ask your questions, please clearly state your name, spell your last name, and provide your address. It is important that our court reporter be able to keep a clear and accurate public record. Our court reporting is done through the audio and visual system, so make sure to speak clearly into the microphone also. After all witnesses have been heard, members of the interested public will have their second opportunity to speak, and at that time you may express your opinion, positive or negative, about the application. Then the public hearing is closed and we enter into executive session where the board members discuss the application and vote. You will be able to listen to our executive session, but you will not normally be able to participate in our discussion. Most applications are heard and decided in the same evening. If an application requires additional information or testimony that cannot be presented tonight, we will carry your application to another date and it will not be decided during this meeting. Krista Anderson, the city zoning officer, has asked that I remind all applicants that they must read carefully the resolution that documents the zoning board's decision and to pay particular attention to the conditions contained in the resolution. For example, if a landscaping plan is required, you must obtain one and submit it to John Linson, the city's forester. If a grading plan is required, you must have one prepared by a civil engineer and submit 3 copies along with the application fee to the city's engineering division. Failure to satisfy all conditions in the resolution will result in a delay in approving your application, as it will necessitate additional follow-up from zoning and other city staff. The resolutions documenting the board's decision will normally be available 1 month after we decide the application. Before I call the applicants forward, and I think it's pretty much going to be the Mr. Weber show this evening, we have the great distinction to swear a new member in, a wild card for our applicants, those that have come before us. So Andy, if you'd lead us through the oath for our newest member.
I would love to. Jay, if you could please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Jay Feskins,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and to the governments established in the United States
and to the governments established in the United States
and in this state
and in this state
under the authority of the people.
under the authority of the people.
I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly
that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly,
perform all the duties as a member of the Summit Zoning Board
that I will perform all the duties of as a member of the Summit Zoning Board
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my abilities.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations and welcome.
Now that we've all sworn our allegiance to the Constitution, let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now we're all official. Mr. Weber, I believe all of the applications, including our resolution, have the red thread of Alfonso and Weber running through them.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. With regard to the application for relevant development at 709 Springfield Avenue, we're requesting that that be carried. We've discussed that with your secretary, and we're looking at a date of March 6th. We have, I expect, 5 witnesses, although I believe we'll be able to complete the presentation that night. Will be as efficient as possible, but we do request that that be carried, and be carried without the need for further notice.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. I'll pause for a moment. Are there any members of the interested public here with regard to that application? Hearing and seeing none. Any questions from members of the board for Mr. Weber? We'll see him again very soon, not just this evening, but the next session. Okay, then with that, I just need a motion and a second to carry this application without notice.
Without notice and council waiving the time within to act.
Yes, correct, Mr. Paul. Thanks.
Excellent. So we have a motion to carry to March 6th.
Motion to carry.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Your roll call for this? Yes, roll call, please.
Chairman Spar,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Steiner,
Yes.
Ms. Newell. Yes. Mr. Gonzalez,
Yes.
Mr. Malay,
Yes.
Ms. Toad,
Yes.
Mr. Feskins.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. So that would take us to 90 Ashwood Avenue, Design, Build, and Management Incorporated. That's a cool company name. Mr. Weber, welcome again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, James Weber of Alfonso and Weber, on behalf of the applicant, Design, Build, Management, Inc., with the partner of Menza and Beisel as the limited liability company as part of that applicant. And I have with me Mr. Michael Menza. I appreciate the board granting the adjournment from our original hearing, given the HPC comments with regard to the feasibility of retaining the existing home at 90 Ashwood Avenue. Mr. Menza has taken advantage of that opportunity, and he has retained, he's retained PVA Associates, Paul Beck, who is here to provide testimony with regard to the, as he put it, excessive amount of repairs necessary in order to preserve 90 Ashwood. Likewise, Mr. Menza has reached out to his contractors with the report, asking them how much would it cost to renovate this building, to bring it up to code, and the quotes have come back as $940,000 or $850 to $1 million, independent of any latent defects that are unknown at this point, but would be discoverable once the walls are opened. If the board would permit, I would have Mr. Menza testify at this point with regard to the history of the property, the condition of the existing property, the house. I would then ask that Mr. Paul Beck be called to the stand to go through his report, to respond to any further questions that the board members may have with regard to the structure, and then to have Paul Greigel, the planner, address the Historic Preservation Commission, the fact that it's not part or authorized by Common Council, that this is not a historic preservation designated property. It's in the area known as Deantown, which also includes the school, community pool, the former Stevens Miller site, Salerno Twain auto area. So when they say Deantown, recognize that it includes a lot of properties that are clearly not of a historic character. And then Mr. Greigel will address the Historic Preservation Commission, the 2000 master plan, which had attempted to deal with historic preservation element, had a separate element with regard to it, was never adopted by Common Council. And in that element, what they said was, well, if you're going to do this, then you have to have a loan program or a supporting financial program. Or one of the other points was, if you're going to have an architectural facade that's preserved, perhaps a tax credit. Those financial elements may have been an element as to why Common Council declined to have a historic preservation commission, similar to what occurs in Short Hills. I've been in Short Hills, and it is a layer of development of bureaucratic procedures that really increases the amount that is, faces applicants in attempting to improve their properties. For example, in one, it wasn't a historic home, it was just in a historic area. We had to go to the Historic Preservation Commission so that they could sign off on the fence, even though it was not a historic home. And as a result, the application was carried for a period of time. So there's an understanding why Common Council would decline to have a dispositive Historic Preservation Commission. If the board would accept, I would proceed with that process. And then depending upon the board's determination with regard to that presentation, move on to the application that's proposed.
Sounds great. Thank you, Mr. Weber. And I think for the benefit of the board, we have an excerpt from, or actually maybe in full, the HPC's comments that were submitted via email. And you have seen these, Mr. Weber.
I have seen that, Mr.
And then we have an attachment, a document, which I believe is the engineer's report in writing, the latest engineer's report opining on the economic feasibility of rehabilitation of the structure. Is that a fair characterization?
That's fair. That's,
You
Mr.
can characterize it otherwise if you'd like.
I think that that should have been distributed to the board members.
It was. They're
If
just
not, we
printed
have it
copies.
available.
Should it be marked, because it's not part of the original package?
Yes, I suppose let's mark it.
Okay, so I don't think we necessarily need to mark the HPC comments. But these were submitted via email, but are these posted
I
online?
posted them online, yes.
What do you think?
Let's mark them also.
Let's
just
mark
in
them
case
all,
it might
okay.
not have been within sufficient time.
So then for the record, we would mark A1, would be the HPC's comments shared with the board secretary, and these were communications transmitted from the chair of the HPC to the zoning board secretary, Stephanie Sulios. These are dated January 18th. The time of receipt is 9:43 a.m. These are posted for public review. And then A2 would be a cover letter from Alfonso and Weber, but the substance of the document is an engineering report dated November 28th, 2022, from the applicant's engineers. And this was also posted online. But for the completeness of the record, is now forever embedded in the public record. Okay.
Thank you. I'd ask that Michael Menza be called to the stand to be sworn in to give testimony in this matter.
If you could raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And please state your name, spell your last name.
Michael Menza, M-E-N-Z-A.
Thank you.
Is that being picked up on the microphone?
It should be. Either microphone, if you'll just keep it relatively close, that's fine.
Mr. Menza, a few preliminary questions. What relationship do you have to the applicant before the board tonight?
I am the owner of Design Build and Management. Design Build and Management is a sub-S corporation with Howard Beisel and myself. It was our first business name going back 32 years ago. Menza and Beisel Homes is also one of our companies. We are the sole owners of both companies.
And are you authorized to speak on behalf of the applicant tonight?
I am.
And you're familiar with the application that has been brought before the board?
I am.
And how did you achieve that familiarity?
I acquired the property in 2018, and I began working with the property contract in 2018 with the former owner. And during that time, we went through environmental audit of the property, and we started the design phase, looking at various options. So I was involved with the entire process.
And you prepared a statement that you would like to give to the board with regard to the existing conditions of the property. We would do that simply as your statement without the need for further question and answer. Is that acceptable to you?
Yes, it is. I'd like to provide background of the property. There were questions in the report about the past use, the environmental issues. I'd like to go through that with a statement. Please. Okay. Beginning around November 1919, as far as we can go back through deeds and from what I understood from the former owner, the DiPiero family resided in the house. Mr. DiPiero utilized the yard and buildings for his contracting business. The property was eventually transferred from Cesar DiPiero to his son, Peter DiPiero, who resided in the two-family house and continued using the contract yard until 1992. It's pretty interesting that only one family, two generations, resided in the house and utilized the yard and buildings from 1919 through 1992. At that time, it was transferred to Nelson and Daisy Reyes. Nelson Reyes was an employee of Peter DiPiero and eventually bought his business and the house and the property. The Reyes lived in one side of the two-family house and continued the business operations on the property. There was a basement-level apartment in the house that did not have municipal approvals. So, a legal two-family, but there was an additional apartment in the basement. In 2018, I contracted to purchase a property from Nelson and Daisy Reyes, subject to an environmental audit. There were two home heating oil tanks that were decommissioned in the rear of the two-family dwelling. The house at one point was converted to gas. We had those two tanks removed under permit. And in addition to that, we found a 550-gallon gasoline tank that was in front of the shop building. That was also permitted to be removed. We had retained an LSRP to conduct an audit.
Before you move off, what's an LSRP?
An LSRP is a licensed site remediation professional that's authorized under New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection to handle environmental matters. So they went through the permitting process, the soil testing, and removed the oil tank. In addition to that, we found asbestos in the rear shop building that was encapsulated on the boiler for that building. We had that removed by a DEP licensed contractor. The residential two-family house and the commercial buildings, what we found is that they're physically obsolete and in a decrepit state of repair. This would require a disproportionate amount of investment to try to bring these buildings back. Even then, there's structural issues, primarily with the house, which would make this costly and possibly nearly impossible, given the existing foundation system and the structural issues. In referring to the page up,
Which way do you want me to go?
going back, Jim has just shown some of the existing pictures. I believe I submitted in with the board package.
You had indicated there was a boiler. I just was looking for that boiler. There
Yes,
it
it
is.
would be in this, but yes, it's in this building here. The boiler is up on the upper right-hand side, and you can see there's that's shown with the asbestos already removed and cleaned up on that.
And I interrupted to reflect the pictures. You were describing then the condition of the two-family house.
Correct. So on this photo board here, I have just exterior pictures. I did not have any of the interior pictures. I know Mr. Beck has those in his report, but these pictures here will give you a view from the exterior conditions. Unfortunately, the house wasn't well maintained over the years. There was a significant amount of settlement, and Mr. Beck would go through that.
And you've been a builder for how long?
I've been in the business for 40 years total. My partnership with Howard Beisel has been 32 years.
Unless there's any questions of Mr. Menza, I would ask that Paul Beck, the structural engineer, be called to the stand to provide testimony in this matter.
Just one point of clarification. Mr. Weber, you referred to this primary structure as a two-family home.
Correct.
In practice, it is a two-family home? It's
Yes.
De facto, but de jure, in terms of permitted use, it doesn't exist today as a permitted two-family dwelling.
No, it exists as a permitted two-family.
This
It does
particular-
not permit, it's not a permitted three-family.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
When we scroll to the front, and there's the picture, you can see to the left with the covered portico, that's the main building. To the right is the addition, and that goes up the stairs to an apartment that's on the second floor. And what they apparently did, and we can have this confirmed by Mr. Menza, was use one of the rooms of the existing principal structure to provide space for the addition that's on the right. So when you look at the back of the building, let's see if I can find the back. You can see it over on the left is the addition with the main structure there in the foreground in the center.
And then I'm comfortable with moving to the structural engineer. Is there any questions from the board?
One of the questions may have been semantics, and maybe misunderstood what Mr. Weber said. One of the variances being asked for granting is a two-family dwelling, because two-family dwelling is not permitted in this zone, but yet you're saying what they have there is permitted, the current two-family use?
Pre-existing non-conforming.
As a okay, so it's not permitted, it's a pre-existing.
Same with the contractor's yard, same with the storage,
Okay.
the office. It's all pre-existing non-conforming use, so we're looking at, by Mr. Menza's background research, 1920. So,
Any questions?
How old is this roof? How old is the roof?
how old is the roof?
Yes, on the
That's a
building.
good question for Mr. Beck, and
Oh,
when we
okay.
bring him up, we'll have
We'll
him
wait for that.
testify as to his view of the roof.
I thought the owner knew about it, no?
Perhaps the structural engineer can answer the question, greater degree of
If you
specificity.
can estimate,
I'm sorry.
can you estimate what the date of the roof is, the tile roof?
You bought it as such?
Excuse me?
You purchased the
I
house
did.
with that roof?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I think the roof, it's a clay tile roof.
Yes,
And
I know.
There are several of the tiles that have fell off the roof. Every time I go to the house, there's one or two of these clay tiles that
On the ground.
have fallen off the roof.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then, sorry, Mr. Weber, I'm going to interrupt one more time. I have a question for Mr. Ball, and you're welcome to join the speculation. Can you help explain for the board a central question that's being discussed, I should say, this evening, is on the economic feasibility of this project. How is the board meant to incorporate the question of economic feasibility into their decisions?
Certainly. So economic feasibility itself is not a factor that the board would be looking at as far as any of the positive or negative criteria we would be weighing. What the board's focus would be are any of the specific benefits the applicant's proposing. And then from what we've seen in the reports, the issue is going to be a matter of the historic nature of the property and whether its removal is a significant negative of the application. So,
Mr. Weber, you get a crack at that as well.
disagree to a certain extent. When you look at, for example, use variances can be based on the inherently beneficial advancement of the purposes, or if there's an undue hardship associated with the economic unfeasibility. We're not dealing with that issue here. I'm just saying that in terms of land use, it is a type of argument and consideration that the board is entitled to engage in. When you look at it with regard to a C1, and you talk about dealing with the condition of the property, or you're talking about lawfully existing structures, when those lawfully existing structures are brought into play, then the economic feasibility or infeasibility of preserving those can be an element that the board can consider. Likewise, under C2, where you have that greater flexibility between the C1 and the use variance, the board can take into consideration not the profit that would be attributed to the applicant, but whether or not something can in fact be saved, whether or not something can be restored.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. We'll, I'm sure, have an opportunity to discuss a little bit further. Andy, anything you would want to add to that to enrich Mr. Weber's explanation?
No, I suppose I do agree. I guess I was focusing more on the profit aspect of it, which is not something we would engage in at all. But if they're advancing that argument that it's absolutely something that cannot be restored as a matter of economic fact, the board can take that into consideration.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weber.
I just have, no, go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say, but if I understand Mr. Weber, you're not suggesting that that standard applies to this case, that you're talking about other types of variances where we would take the economic impact, the cost.
Yeah, that's an example where in the land use world, you can take that into account. In terms of the feasibility of preserving a structure, yes, you can take that into account. But in doing that, you can't sit there and say, well, if I do that, the applicant gets more money. No, it's not the profit or loss of the applicant. It's whether or not the structure independent of that is capable of being preserved.
Okay, Joe, sorry, what was on your mind?
I'm not sure if I heard this right, but did I hear that there was a third apartment in here?
Yes.
Okay, there was a third apartment. How does that affect the illegal use of a two-family? Now it's an illegal use of a three-family. When does that expire? I mean,
It was
doesn't that
never
expire
approved.
when? And well, just for the applicant, was the facility ever utilized as a three-family while under your ownership?
It was not.
Okay. I don't know if if the grandfathering of this thing disappeared when they made it into a three-family. It's no longer a two-family at
Well,
all.
I don't think they're advancing that as the
No,
proposal.
but are we?
No, I haven't heard testimony of when that illegal apartment came into use or whether they're claiming that predates and they should be able to use it, but it's not part of their proposal. It's not something that has been approved or that we would be considering to approve, so I think it's more or less irrelevant.
Okay.
And when you talk about a pre-existing non-conforming use, Mr. Vice Chairman, as you alluded to the extent that there is a violation, that does not necessarily mean that the pre-existing non-conforming use is voided or abandoned. So it has to be something where the pre-existing use itself has to be expanded to the point that the use is now lost. So in other words, all of a sudden, it is a position where you're changing the use. Upon a change in the use, then you start to develop the abandonment. But throughout the pre-existing non-conforming uses, intent of the property owner is an element.
I think we'll hear more about that during the application, so
Yeah.
hold your breath. Thank you, Mr. Weber, for
If
the
only
deviation.
if we have to talk about that, because the basement apartment is just there,
Sure.
and it's not claimed to be a legal apartment.
Having found that the applicant didn't own it solves my problem.
Very good.
I feel better moving the language from illegal to pre-existing non-conformity. That always soothes me. So, Mr. Weber, if you'd like to move to your next witness, please.
I
do.
would ask that Paul Beck be called to the stand to be sworn in to give testimony in this matter. Come on, you can stay. Paul, are you going to stand or are you going to sit? Whatever you want. Please. Okay. I'll pull up your, what? Whatever you want to do. All right. I would, are you going to go through the questioning, please?
Yep, if you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And please state your name, spell your last name.
My name is Paul Beck, B-E-C-K.
Thank you. Can you briefly describe your background, experience, and 3 boards you've appeared before recently?
I don't think you have enough time.
I said briefly.
I have had my own firm since 1978, which means we passed 44 years, starting on 45. Before that, I grew up basically in engineering. My father was what's called a steel detailer. He made sure that the pieces fit together when they went out in the field. And as long as I could get high enough to put drawings through a printer, I was involved in engineering. I got a bachelor's of engineering in Lehigh University out in Pennsylvania. Excellent school, more so then than it is now, because they spread themselves a little thin in my regard, and I hope nobody comes back at me for that, but that's life. We have a great engineering firm that's been around. Most of my people have been there a long time. 19 years ago, I built my own house and had enough confidence in one of my engineers to let my engineer design the structure of my house. I did look over her shoulder when she did it, but she's one of my best engineers in housing. We have taken on investigations into a lot of houses. I can go on and on. A lot of them with, unfortunately, some of our rainstorms, big rainstorms, basements collapsed and things like that in that last Hurricane Ida. We got like 9 inches of rain in one day. There was overflows of rivers and things like that. A lot of my engineers then got broken in, no pun intended, on going out and fixing basement walls that were cracked, some of them that collapsed in their entirety. And in the meantime, we've worked for a lot of architects. We're very critical of the other professionals because we have to make it stand up. That's our job. Now, I was asked to come out and look at this house.
If I can, Mr. Beck?
Licensed in the state of New Jersey, I imagine?
I'm licensed in 21 states. First was actually
New
York,
Jersey included?
because that had to do with the,
Yeah.
it had to do with the way they gave out their tests. Now, the test is kind of universal. So I first got my license in New York, then I moved into New Jersey, and since then I'm licensed in 21 states. I think I've only used it in about 19.
And you heard
Licensed
Mr. Ball's
in New
question that
Jersey,
you are
correct.
currently licensed in New Jersey.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I
And
believe that's all we need to hear as far as your qualifications.
When I
He's
saw-
also-
Has any questions?
he's also testified before the Summit Board of Adjustment previously, although it's been, what, 10 years now?
It's probably 10 years ago. I don't remember. I remember sitting here, but I don't remember exactly. I was with a, can't think of her last name, Karen.
Okay, we won't hold that to you.
Who was here.
I think once I saw your pocket protector, I knew your credentials would hold up. So we're happy to accept your credentials this evening.
Well, people start to think that I'm sick. So,
Well, thank you for joining us this evening. I think Mr. Weber will offer you some questions, but we look forward to hearing your testimony.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I deem that the board finds him acceptable
We do, yes.
as a structural engineer. Yes. Now, Mr. Beck, are you familiar with the application that's currently pending before the board with regard to 90 Ashwood Avenue?
I'm not an expert on all of what is going on. I know what I did with the report. I was asked to give them my opinion of the building, structural repairs that would have to be done and anything else that I ran into. Now, having had this experience for this many years and a lot of those similar things, I was tempted to count the number of houses I've looked at in this town. I probably would have stayed with the double figures. I don't think I got to 100. But we have gone through house after house after house in all the towns around here. My office is in Fairfield, so it's a little bit north from here, and we have covered almost every town in northern New Jersey.
Can you
We have
turn
a-
to your report on 90 Ashwood Avenue?
Well, bring it in.
Well, we can bring it up on the screen, or you can bring it in front of you. How do you want to do that?
Doesn't matter.
Mr. Menta, do you have a copy, a paper copy of his report?
We have a lot of experience in seeing old houses. My very excellent engineer broke her beginnings by going to a lot of houses, a lot in any town, but a lot of the houses in the older towns, and you can pick the town and it's going to be that way. Early 1900s, we're accustomed to that. Before World War I, after World War I, and beginning of World War II, and then a slew of houses after World War II. Some of which are in this town, a lot of them are west from here, and we've gone through many of those houses. We are critical because we think we're professionals. We're critical of some of the framing they did, although that was the only techniques they had. Some of the way they put floor joists together, which were undersized to begin with, and the only way they got those pieces to fit was by cutting them in a certain way so that they could attach them with a nail. We don't do that anymore. We have a lot of different brackets that put things together today. There's no way we would build a house in the way that those houses were built in the early 1900s. And that led, or can lead, to problems. The discussion you had about the roof, those tiles on the roof, they can last 50 years, they can last 75 years, but they do start to age after a while. Now, you're not going to get 75 years out of a normal roof you would put on a house today. But those types of roofs did last a long time, but they do start to fall apart. And when that happens, it becomes rather expensive to start patching them. I've done work with a couple of roofing businesses, and I've spoken to them. If they handle tiles, then the tiles are expensive, the installation of them is expensive, and I'm not here to tell you how much that is. That's, as far as I'm concerned, left to somebody else, which I'm finding out tonight. They did talk to contractors to try to get those numbers. Earlier today, I told someone that I wouldn't give him an estimate of how much something's going to cost. I can tell you if you need it, and if I can tell you how you have to do it, but I will not tell somebody the exact amount of money.
Now, Mr. Beck, on your report that you had prepared November 28th, you had the opportunity to walk through 90 Ashwood Avenue.
Oh, yes, I walked through the entire house. I don't know if everybody has seen the report. There are 17 photographs that I put into the report that I took about 25 photographs. And the only reason I left the other ones out is I didn't want to bore anybody, and I used the 17 that I had to basically point out to the key locations.
I can bring those photographs up on the screen
Yeah,
if that's
okay.
appropriate.
For instance, on that house, as I purposely took it from that angle, because as I started to walk down the driveway, which is on the left side of the house, I saw the leader coming down from the gutter, and it was nicely dumping water right behind the stove.
That was me.
Okay, we'll just leave you as a lawyer. The water was definitely causing some of the blocks in the wall to start to move over. The day I was there, it was nice and cold, and I could see ice there. That photograph you just went by with the roof, well, stay there. The gutter comes down, it doesn't take the water to any good place to get rid of the water. It just spills it out. It was working on the little retaining wall that's there. It's not a huge wall. And then it was dumping it right along the side of the wall. So when we got in the basement, we saw that there was some water infiltration in the basement, believing to be partly due to the way that leader was brought down and wasn't set in so that the water would stay away from the house. This particular site is very steep. And in fact, when I started to pull in with my car, I decided I'd be better off on the street rather than on the slope there, because it is quite steep. It doesn't look that way right there, but it really is. And the minute you drop the water on, it's going to start to lay next to the house. That's one of the items. The back set of steps should really be torn off and rebuilt. If you're going to try to keep the house, that's one thing you could practically put your hat on any time. The wood that's put up there weathers because of snow, water, and it wears out, and it looked bad enough that I wasn't thrilled about even walking up there. There are a lot of other situations.
Next photo?
You can go to the next one.
Mr. Beck, if you pause for a moment. Mr. Weber, what comes to my mind, sorry, Mr. Beck, just to interrupt for just a quick moment. What comes to my mind is, it's my understanding from the applicant's earlier testimony that they purchased the property, contracted for it in 2018, that's correct? Mr. Beck's report arises at the end of 2022, so a 3-year period had transpired. Is it the position of the applicant that the condition that Mr. Beck inspected the home in was the condition when the property was acquired? Was there any effort to maintain or hold steady the state of the property during that approximately 2 to 3 year period?
That's a good question, Mr.
It
Chairman.
may not be a question, Mr. Beck. I apologize for getting back to
I don't
maybe
know
Mr.
that
Why
Beck.
don't can we recall Mr. Menz at this point, and let's address
Just
that
answer
question.
that would be helpful. Mr. Minson. Can you
Yes,
speak to
that was
the condition,
the condition of the property.
at acquisition and any steps you did or did not take over the 2 to 3 year period between the acquisition of the property and essentially the submission of the application? As I understand, you were probably weighing your options, but I'll let you reflect
Right,
on that.
so we actually closed on the property, it was 2021.
Okay.
So during that 2018 to 2021, we were going through the environmental endeavor on the property. The former owners, the house was not well maintained during their occupancy of it. They kept, after the closing, they kept belongings in the property, and just recently it was totally vacated.
When you say just recently, do you remember when?
I do not, because they were pulling items out during the course of time, so I don't have the exact day when it was, or the month.
2022?
2022, yes. So the photos show the condition of the property as it
Okay.
stands in November, December of this year.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Minson. Sorry, Mr. Beck. Apologies for
That's
interrupting.
okay. That photo just shows that there was some water infiltration, and I believe there might have been a pipe that let out some water, and that's the sections of the roof that fell down onto that first floor. Now, that's all, it's all throughout the house. And the minute you see that, you know that they have to be checked to see if they have asbestos in them. A lot of the older houses were built that way. We were involved with one house, or I was involved with one house in Montclair where the entire house was stripped of everything because there was asbestos in it, and the parents who were in the house, had purchased the house, were now getting very concerned because their children were there and all of that. So when you start dealing with it, you have to get it all out, which is not cheap. And again, I can't tell you how cheap, but it's a job to take it down. If it
Next
has
photo.
asbestos, you have to dispose of it in the appropriate manner and all of that. Doesn't take much for the separation, because the way it's attached can be a couple of different methods. It can be with little pieces of wood that then they put it up against that and hope that it stays. There's wire mesh in some cases. So there's a lot of different ways to cover all of both the walls and the ceiling.
You're talking about plaster attached to the
Talking
lat?
about the plaster, yeah. So once you see that, you know that you got some water in there, it cut it loose, and boom, that was the end of it. All right, go to the next picture. That's simply a picture, you get a good look at it, of how cockeyed the window is in the frame. Over time, wood will start to change. First of all, the initial wood that's put up always shrinks. So it shrinks over a long period of time. And if moisture gets on the wood, makes it all the worse. Things will shift, get twisted, and that was just evidence of a window. And there are doorways also in a couple of pictures that I have, where you can see how cockeyed the pictures are. The doors are not setting properly.
You want me to
in the
skip down
frame
to
of the
that
door.
photo?
That's up in the attic.
Right.
That's terrible up there. Framing was what best they could do at that time. It needs a lot of repair work. The wood has somewhat shrunk, and the top piece of wood has a slope to it. The piece of wood, which is, I think, on the next picture, right above that window, is also sagging up there. And again, if you look at the right and left-hand side of that, you see a little black section. That's where they cut the wood to try to put everything together. There are a lot of different ways that wood was put together in those days. Even the roof rafters, which you can see, they don't sit on top of the beam. They cut out a section of the beam so that it can sit on top of the beam, while part of it is hanging down alongside the wood beam there. But that also causes a crack to develop where they cut the piece out. That's a common failure there. Now, I'm not saying that every one of those beams ended up that way, but they sure are in that position. Those windows also need to be replaced. The high arrow going across is normally put on framing. Either every other pair of rafters. Years ago, it was every third set of rafters. In the early 1900s, they didn't bother to put any in. So if snow accumulates on the roof, it's trying to make the roof push down, and it's trying to push the walls out. The stronger the walls, the more it can try to hold it together. We would not let somebody go ahead with a house like this unless they either changed that beam that was up there or put another beam. I had a client call me into a very old house on Monday, and we're putting in a new beam for that beam, so that it has the capability of taking the load if the roof is filled with snow. Now, one positive side of the tiles is that the tiles are a little more slippery for the snow to fall off. Doesn't mean it won't stay up there, but it'll just be less number of times. But that'll also, then the water will help the tiles get loose. So it's kind of a circular deal. If the snow doesn't come off the roof, as it melts, it's going to try to come into the building. And if it cleans off the roof, you won't have as much pressure for the same amount of time. Again, down with those little arrows towards the bottom, it's not really that the rafters are sitting on that beam in a proper manner. So those are continuous things that would have to be put in. That's a picture of tiles that had been put on. I would venture a guess to say those might be 1950s, because that's what I grew up in, as a 1950s house, and a very similar type of tile. Now, the house I grew up in, the tile is still intact. That looks like they had some movement of the wood underneath it, and therefore there's a crack moving through that bathroom. So that kind of tells us that the floor would need to be reinforced in some manner. That was a location where I saw water had infiltrated there. It didn't get bad enough to take down the plaster. But of course, if you have a hole in the ceiling, it seems like the wood always finds that place to go. And that's one of the doors where you can see how it's touching on the right-hand side. And it's elevated a little bit out, so that everything is somewhat twisted out of size. Now, I usually, in the last year or so, I've walked in with a little ball, and I put it on the floor and see where it rolls off to. Because in a situation like that, that ball is going to take off and go to the other side of the room. Again, one of those things that if you're going to take all the plaster out of everything, which would be the ceiling below this, you would then wind up putting extra wood framing in the floor system so that you could make it more rigid. That's the second condition, where you can see that the door is very tight on the left-hand side, but it's not the same where it comes and where it closes. There's going to be a gap underneath it. This is kind of a mess. This is where the water tank is. You're looking at the basement wall on that left side of the house. There's just a real mixture of electrical lines and everything like that. There are some prior elements of the way they used to put electricity in those houses. I don't think any of it is in there now, but I could see some of the leftover knobs that they called it, which was still up there. But what happens is, over a period of a lot of years, they start with that knob and wire for the electricity through the house. And then as that changes over time, people put in what they can put in for the least amount of money, and a lot of that gets mixed up. And the electric is still running okay, as far as I know. It's just that you don't really want to keep it that way, because the wires should be put in a proper manner. And I'm sure that some of those were wires that were in the 50s or the 40s, well, after 45. But That kind of wiring wasn't what you would see in the 60s, the 70s, and right up till now. Entirely different stuff. That big arrow was pointing to the window where water was getting in. And that was probably getting in from around the window because the water that was from that leader I had started with, that water is lower than the window. So the water wasn't coming up. No way was it getting up that high to get in the window. But the window is deteriorated enough that it's starting to leak in there. I don't want to bore you completely here.
Mr. Beck, maybe to bring it to a point is,
Yeah.
would you consider any of these observations, maybe all of them, but any of these observations to constitute an unsafe condition to prevent safe habitation of the property?
Yeah, I think I would say that. I mean, all you have to do is ask me, would I live in this house? The answer would be only after I did all these repair work to it, because if not, you're asking for a problem. And that has to do with some of the fact that the lumber that was put in was really not as good as it should have been, not as deep as it should be, and things like that. And those characteristics went right up through the 50s. When I first started my own business, I had people calling me because tiles were cracking. And I found out that the lumber that was it was custom to take the lumber and span approximately 15 feet, but they really shouldn't have because there was a little bit of sag to it. Again, I can take you for hours on this one.
Okay, Mr. Beck,
But
maybe another
this-
question I have.
This situation is a spot right by that little garage, around the back of the house is a little garage. That post there seemed to be settling into the ground, which could be from the ground over time settling, or it could be the amount of rain and everything we'd be getting, because, again, I'll pull age on you. When I was a little kid, we used to get rain every single day, a little bit of rain for a week. For some reason, our entire environment is different. We seem to get nothing, 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 and then we get deluged with water. So when you put that much water in, you can make the soil do something that it wouldn't have if it was just slightly wet. And that's in the
Yeah,
back.
Mr. Beck, maybe another just angle to consider this is, in terms of structural integrity, if you were even to make some bare minimum repair to this property to make it habitable, how many more years does this structure have left in its life?
Well, if we do a redesign and tell somebody how to reinforce the house, I think we would tell them that there shouldn't be any reason it wouldn't last for 30 years, as long as, here's the catch, as long as you take care of everything and you don't let the water leak in, because the wood can be great, but if you let the water come in there, you're going to have a problem. I was in a condominium last week over something that came up a year ago when they had some very sophisticated framing from the late 1970s. But the way that the wood was put together was with what's called a pressure plate. And the second floor leaked water into the space to the person down below. And when they looked in the hole, these brackets, which were holding everything together, pulled away. Because once wood gets soft, or once wood gets wet, it will be soft. And you can even see nails come out at sometimes. If it's a nice long nail, it may not come out. But there's a lot of things like that. It's very complicated, and I wouldn't suggest that somebody come into a house unless they took all the steps to make it proper.
Thank you.
That's an easy one. That's the outside gutter. The way the gutter was built with wood, over time, hasn't been cleared out and everything. The water has actually eaten through, and the bottom of that gutter is rotted away, so when water comes in, it can go right through the bottom of the gutter instead of going to where it should be. So that was, now this one was just looking at some of the framing that was out there on the exterior. That's where those steps were. And again, that wood is just going bad. So unfortunately, we have to tell that to a lot of people. If you don't go out there and you don't put paint on it and you don't cover it, then you're just gonna pay the piper later. It happens with steel also. If they don't put paint over it, and I shouldn't use Rust-Oleum as but they were one of the first. Now there's plenty of paints that cover steel and kind of try to keep it from rusting. And yet, we see it every day of the week practically, where people don't maintain the building. And when that happens, the water gets in, gets on the edges. Sometimes I can go see old schools, and I can write half my report before I get there. Because I know if they have steel that are over the windows and things like that, it's gonna be rusted, and the bricks are gonna be cracked. And I could almost write half of the report before I get on the site.
Now,
because
Mr. Beck,
that's the
following
way
up
it
with
is.
the chairman's question with regard to how much would be necessary to make this habitable, what structural elements could be employed. In terms of that work, would that also have to be brought up to conformance with the Uniform Construction Code?
Well, yes, it should be. I mean, you're not gonna change it and make it less, or even leave it the way it is. We would say, put this additional framing in to bring it up to the level where it should be.
And in your last paragraph of your report, if I can draw your attention to it here in front of you. So in your last paragraph, it says, in conclusion, the residence requires an excessive amount of repairs in an attempt to restore the residence. Floors will have to be reframed so that they provide level floors to maintain their position. It is likely that plaster ceilings will need to be removed, possibly along with plaster on the interior of the house. So often plaster is found to have contained asbestos. The structure of the house will require redesign of structural members in both the floor systems, roof framing, and wall construction. Do you stand by that paragraph?
Yes, I know that if there's any elements there, we did see some of the framing in the walls. We didn't see everything. But yes, all of this stuff needs to be brought up. I didn't know the number. I heard it tonight, but I didn't even suggest a number. But I know from experience, from building a house, and I know the experience from being in so many of these, that it's going to be very expensive to try to rectify it. Another thing I shouldn't probably tell anybody, but a friend of ours' son was buying a house in, let's just say, Bergen County. He brought me out to the house, and he finally walked away from the deal after I got done with him, because it was just so much to repair. He was not buying a cheap house. It was an expensive house, but he was going to spend a fortune just trying to correct the things that were wrong. In some cases, you see what are called screw jacks, where they put in what you think is a column in the building. It's not the right thing, but people put them in and twist them to pick things up, especially if a floor is down. Somebody's got a heavy piano in the living room, and they suddenly see the floor is sagging, so they go in and they put those extra screw jacks in there, and it holds it up. It does. It's not right, and you don't know how long that's going to stay. But we walk in there. Actually, we usually before we're there, somebody, if they're buying a house, has an inspection, and the inspectors right away, their favorite words are, go call a structural engineer, because they see the screw jacks and they say, go see a structural engineer. They see cracks in the walls. In some cases, they see a roof or, well, house I was out at Monday.
If I can, Mr.
Had a
Beck?
big sag in the roof.
Okay, the board's focused on 90 Ashwood, and they appreciate your experience and the amount of homes that you've inspected throughout North Jersey and including in Summit. I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Dipti, from one engineer to another, is there anything you'd like to draw attention to from Mr. Beck's report?
Yes. If there are settlement issues currently with the house, what would be the solution for the proposed structures? For building the proposed structures? What would need to be?
I'm sorry, did you say with settlement?
Yeah, it was noted that there was a lot of settlement for the house, so what would be the solution with the new structures that are proposed to be built?
Well, we did not retain Mr. Beck for the
Okay.
new structures that are
Okay.
going to be constructed.
Okay.
And we can reserve that question for Mr. Menza or for Mr. Scott, the civil engineer.
Well, maybe we could ask him what should be done to deal with the settlement.
You
Should
really
the-
have
should it be
the
retained?
settlement with
Should it
40
be retained?
Oh, we're talking about 90 Ashwood? Yes, you
Right.
can ask him with regard to 90 Ashwood, the house that's existing.
Right.
Yes.
What would have to be done
Okay,
to deal with
that's
that?
fine, too. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I can give you a very short version of that. You would get a geotech engineer out there, because they specialize in the soil. They don't do anything above that, and we don't do anything below that. They would come out, if the soil is bad, they would give the recommendation, and there are several ways of attacking it, so that you could get a proper support for whatever you're building. Whether it was this house, which would be very complicated to improve it, let's say. And if they were building new houses on this site, they would have to get the soil investigation. It makes it a little bit easier when you're starting from scratch. But we've done some large buildings.
I think we want to stay
Yeah.
with this house
Yes.
and as it exists and what would have to happen.
Okay, I was just emphasizing that you need a professional to go out, look at the soil, and then you'll get.
And that's not in your area of expertise?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Is it fair to say that this house, after 100 years, has reached its final settlement?
I'm sure there was some settlement over the time from when it was built until, let's say, the 30s or something like that. I think there's probably, or there could have been, more movement of it in the last 5 years or 10 years because we're getting these heavier storms. We get snow, we get a foot or 2 feet of snow. We don't get 6 inches like we used to. So when you overdo something like that, it can cause movement that you wouldn't have expected to have at another time. But then again, you need somebody who's a geotech, who's an expert in that, who will take a sample and let you know what it is.
Thank you.
Anything else regarding 90 Ashwood's current condition? We'll have an opportunity to hear from the civil engineer for the other.
I do have one question, still trying to figure out how to phrase it. Often with historic preservation, the concern is more just preserving the facade and specifically the facade that is seen from the street as opposed to what's inside the building. And I know you can't quantify things for us, but how does that change some of the calculus if all we were talking about was preserving the exterior visible to passersby?
You can do that. You can do it. We've done it in other locations, in particular New York City, where they want the facade to stay. But in the cases we've been involved in, it's cost the owner a lot of money to maintain that wall because you have to brace it and everything and start fixing up what's inside behind it. And you have problems possibly with the exterior finishes. And of course, what you're discussing would want the finish to look just like it did before. So that could mean that you have to patch up the exterior to make it back to what it was. We had one in downtown New York. and it
Yeah,
was-
again, we're talking about this building, thank
Yeah,
you.
Well, you're asking the idea
Yeah.
of maintaining the exterior so that could stay, and what would you have to do inside?
Well,
You know?
I mean, as opposed to dealing with the series of interior photographs you showed us, if that was not part of the consideration. That's not the way I wanted to ask the question.
I have one that may tag along with this.
Thank you.
You stated, Mr. Beck, that you are not putting numbers to this report, but in your final conclusion, you say that there's an excessive amount of repairs. How do you quantify excessive when?
Well,
Go ahead.
It's kind of simple. I look at what sections of the house we would want to attack to fix, things like that. If it was just the attic, I would say that's a small repair. But when I start looking at that and translating that through the whole house, it's going to be a lot of money. I can't tell them how much money it's going to be. I can imagine from what I did, but I put up a brand-new house. On other houses that we've worked in, and it could have been in Short Hills, it could have been in Montclair, that we've done a lot of work in old houses in Montclair. And you start going through thousands of dollars in a very big hurry. Just trying to manipulate the pieces to get them into the house, taking down what has to be taken down and new stuff put in. So I felt it's reasonable to say it's going to cost you a lot. Now, how much a lot is, how much can they afford a lot? It's not my space to tell them how much. But I see they went out and they spoke to contractors about what it would cost. And that's a better procedure than, I'll tell you, people are always twisting my arm. But what do you think? How much do you possibly think? And I hold it and I stand in my place and I say, I can't tell you that number. I'm happy to talk to a contractor if he wants to talk to me, but he's the guy that knows how much the labor is going to be. Sometimes the labor is far more than the material. Now, I don't know, in the house here, you start talking about stripping that, all the ceilings out and all the walls out. That's a lot of money right there, just to take it out, put it into a dumpster, get it taken to a place that'll accept it, things like that. So, but I'm not about to throw a number on that. That would be unfair, because I don't want to be wrong high, I don't want to be wrong low.
If I may, can I take the point, can I go away from just the monetary side of this and talk about the labor side of this? Can you walk us through very briefly what you think it would take to deconstruct this house, take everything that's wrong with it apart, put something new that might work, and then reconstruct it, just the exterior? I would include the roof as well, just for visual aesthetic preservation, right? So would that take a year to do, 2 years to do, 3 years to do? How much labor would be involved to take down an entire house, put it back together?
I got my arm twisted again.
But I'm not going through money, right? Like, money is no object. No, I'm just kidding. Money is an object, obviously. But that would be a lot, right? There are a lot of things that you have to take down, put it back together after finding everything wrong with it inside without even knowing.
Contractor's going to have to bring men to the site,
It's a lot.
men and women, I don't want to be nasty. But you're going to have a lot of people out at the site, and it's going to take them time. If you're going over a large period of time, you have to fight off the weather along with that. So it becomes difficult.
Mr. Steiner?
Mr. Weber, maybe you could get an answer to this. This report was received in November. Has the applicant done any research as to making the repairs that need to be done based upon this report, whether or not he's received any estimates or any idea of what we're all asking about? He's saying, go talk to a contractor. Has our applicant talked to a contractor to find out what the numbers are, and can we hear that testimony?
Yes, we can. The applicant did secure an estimate that's been supplied to the board that came in at $940,000. He had another estimate by another contractor, and that came in as between $850,000 and $1 million. Both of the, and I can bring them up, here we are. And both of those estimates were independent of discovering any latent defects once the walls are opened. So no one knows what the walls are going to show. No one, by looking at the testimony and the report of Mr. Beck, we know that the structure was, I don't know how to say it, shortchanged, where they were cutting the beams, they were fitting things in as the best way that they could, given the way that they managed construction then. So you have to assume that that same type of construction, here we go, that same type of construction is going to engage in the, within the walls. And here's the $850,000 to $1 million.
Can I ask you, did they consider putting beams, like, because you said the structure was unstable, so I don't see any beams, like a steel beam that would secure the house.
When you look at the quotations, and that was the question that followed
We
up.
only have the one for the cabinet installation.
Yeah, I'm getting off, when I, in response to the question following up with the chairman's question, the work will have to be subject to construction code. You're going to need a construction permit to do all this. So in terms of just putting a beam in, it's not going to be that simple, and I think that Mr.
I
Beck
know,
had
but I'm
touched
just
upon.
saying, there was no beams mentioned in this particular, like,
Right.
listing.
They're not, because they haven't gotten into the walls.
Okay.
So they haven't,
But usually you can see that visually.
there's going to probably be that work, correct? There'll probably be the necessity, as Mr. Beck has indicated, addressing the structure of the house itself. And here, if just one more point, the cabinet installation, he's a contractor, by the way. He also does cabinets, but he builds homes, so just doesn't put in cabinets. He was at $940,000. Yes, Mr. Beck?
Oh, I was just going to mention the business with the wall. The way the walls were built, were not built so that if a fire starts in the basement, if you've heard about that, that's happening too many times. The flames will shoot up the wall, get up to the ceiling, next thing you know, the entire building is gone. So they have to make sure that they either put in a material that will keep the fire from going up and block it from getting inside the wall. That's an absolute terrible thing. And there are a lot of old houses where that's occurred, where the studs that make up the wall should be stopping at the floor. No, they go further down, and that leaves a little space. And if, and we say if because that's where the furnace is in the basement, the water heater is down there, so if something goes awry and something catches on fire, that can just shoot itself right up. And there's a lot of even more recent places where that sort of thing happens. That's an important factor. When the building department sees a set of drawings or goes out to a job and sees something like that, it's their job to just holler and say, we don't see that, so you guys have to do something about it. Not that the building department is going to tell them exactly what to do, but just the fact that that should be a safety matter.
Is there currently a COO issued for this property? Certificate of occupancy valid for this property? I mean for the 90? It must have passed inspections when the property was changed hands. So,
Weber, if you can
so
answer
where
that.
were the violations and what kind of violations were issued? And the inspection report, did you refer to the inspection report at time of transfer of property?
If we can have Mr. Menta indicate what CO he received at the time from the city. In terms of the certificate of occupancy inspections, they do not do a structural inspection. It's limited in its scope. Likewise, the inspections that would have occurred as for the transfer from the Caballeros to the Reyeses, we don't have that CO
Yeah, but
inspection.
it touches safety.
It touches it, absolutely.
Mr. Benzo?
Yeah, we took the property in as-is condition. And we did not seek a continuing certificate of occupancy because there was going to be no one occupying the house.
That answers.
Thank you. I just want to make sure Dipti gets every opportunity to ask her questions. We have a professional engineer here serving the board. Let's use her. Dipti, is there anything else you'd like to
No,
comment
you
on?
guys have, everybody has asked plenty of questions that I'm covering now. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you for being our safety net, and thank you for staying awake, Ed. But Ed, what do you got for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in an effort to assist the board with trying to make conclusions as to the structural integrity of the building, did you do any calculations or look at any of the beams in the building, like for instance in the basement? Was it undersized? Was it in a decayed state? Things of that nature. Did you have findings like that?
We couldn't see that much. A lot of it was plaster.
It's
It
already
was
covered.
hiding everything.
Okay.
So
Even
it
in the
was-
basement, it was covered?
It was,
That was where the basement apartment was, so they had
Oh, okay, right.
sheet
yeah,
rock
there was
everything.
plaster in there.
Or plastic.
Okay, so there's really not those conclusions that can be drawn.
Yeah.
You looked at the issue of settlement. Was it really the foundation itself settling, or was it the overall condition of the framing?
Usually the foundation will settle somewhat over a period of time.
Right, right. So was that cracked? Did you see any cracks in the foundation?
I didn't see any horizontal cracks which would raise big, terrible.
Sure, sure. Big, real issues to deal with,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but then again, this house is on a hill, so it's not like the houses that had the water flow up against them and make the basement walls collapse. That was one thing that was not there in the building.
Well, I did notice, though, in one of your photographs, you show the ceiling, I guess, of the attic, and it looks like the spacing between those rafters, I guess they're called?
Hold on,
Rather
if I can,
large.
let me just catch up, Mr.
Sure,
Snickers.
certainly. Help you with sheet, picture number. It looks like picture number 8 or 9. I'm just wondering if that was the condition of the rest of the roof as well, and it looked like that spacing was rather large between the rafters. Obviously, did you notice any leaking or settlement of that as a result, especially with that clay tile roof?
No, I didn't see any particular settlement on that. But as
Clay
far
tile
as
roof is
what you
rather-
observed, you want to do some work off hours?
I'm a frustrated
Yeah,
guy, so
those,
excuse me.
those rafters, again, are further apart than we would typically do these days. We would normally do them at 16 inches on center. Those are about 24 on center, but,
And they seem undersized as well, don't they?
and they seem undersized, yes.
Um,
Now, they're very steep, so that helps with the snow business.
Okay, right, but they seem to be carrying the clay roof. Any deflection of the walls that you noticed? You know, any of the walls bowing or anything like that on the outside of the building?
Only where we saw windows that weren't moving properly,
Okay.
and on the interior, some of the doors that weren't working properly.
Right. I noticed in the estimate, they talk about water and, heating and plumbing upgrades. Did you look at any of those systems within the building or just the structure?
Well, I'm not mechanical.
Okay, just the structure. Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you very much. All right, Dipti's happy, Ed's happy, the board is happy. Mr. Beck's testimony? Okay. We'd offer also members of the interested public to ask any questions. Are you here? I assume you're here for this application.
That's right.
Do you have any questions for the structural engineer?
No structural engineering. It's about, I have a hyper neighbor and I totally agree with her.
Would, maybe, we'll just
Yeah,
pause for a
come up
moment.
I have a question about the old trees that are on the property.
Okay, we can address that perhaps with the civil engineer, maybe, Bess?
I think so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right, we'll offer you the opportunity. And your name, sorry, just so we know?
My name is Leah Miller,
Hi, Leah.
84 Ashland.
Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll get to you shortly. All right, so I think we're good then with Mr. Beck.
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. We're about an hour and a half in, so out of the interest for the board and our patient professionals, we could just take a 5-minute recess.
Very good.
We'll return back. And thank you, Mr. Beck. It was a pleasure having you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, 5 minutes, all. Mr. Weber. What's next?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the testimony of Mr. Greigel with regard to the comments of the Historic Preservation Commission as they were pertinent to the master plan, the REX report, perhaps in the interest of time, the board could consider taking judicial notice of the 2000 master plan. And then the 2000 master plan, it did have an historic preservation element that was presented for consideration by Common Council. It was not adopted as part of Common Council. And it also included within that document a list of individual historic sites in the city of Summit. And that appendix from 2000 master plan does not include 90 Ashwood Avenue. Likewise, the Historic Preservation Commission on its website has brought current that same list and has not expanded it in the 20 years to include 90 Ashwood Avenue. I do have Paul Greigel available to respond to the master plan and the REX report if that board has any questions, but I would ask the board to take judicial notice of the fact that the Historic Preservation Commission is advisory.
Everyone follow? Just not to say a shortcut, but just a summation, I should say, of some of the relevant points.
My only question is if we're going to take judicial notice of the 2000 master plan, what about the 2016 master plan revision?
The REX report is just that. It's a re-examination
Okay,
of the master plan.
so when you're saying REX, you're including the 2016 revision?
Yes.
Okay, thank
But the
you.
REX, again, doesn't have the same status as the master plan itself. It's just a re-examination report. The document that controls is the master plan itself.
Andy, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that accurately summarizes everything. Any questions from the board about?
Somebody wanted to clear me up on judicial.
Yes, we're accepting those representations because they are included in a public record.
As facts.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and everything he
Now,
has mentioned.
why can't we just say fact instead?
I get paid to say judicial notice.
Sorry, I'm not an attorney.
Okay. Yes.
The only question I would have regarding that, if I could ask this question of the applicant, is that you had indicated the historic element of the master plan was not adopted by the Common Council, but yet it's an element of the master plan, correct?
That's correct.
So therefore, it is part of your documents, but it wasn't adopted from the standpoint of creating a historic commission with specific enforcement powers. They only advise this board. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear because it may not have been clear the way he said it. That's why.
Thank you, Mr. Sniggers.
Thank you.
Does this whole thing, this Deantown, where does it end? Does it end at 90 Ashwood, or does it end beyond it?
Deantown was adopted in 2018 by the Historic Preservation Commission. It includes Salerno Duane, goes down to across from the old Celgene site, includes the YMCA, includes Stevens Miller, the old Stevens Miller site.
Right.
Doesn't go too far down Ashwood, but
That's what we need to know, is how far down Ashwood does it go?
do we have it up on?
Well, I think,
don't have it on the
I
screen.
think we're getting an answer from it.
Let me
I might
see.
have a copy of it.
All right.
Yeah, should we swear in?
I'll just sit here and wait all night, it's okay.
Let's swear you in just in
Go
case.
ahead.
If you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Yes. Paul Greigel, Grygiel, for the last name.
Thank you, and you've appeared before us recently. Any changes to your credentials since that last time?
No, I remain a licensed professional planner, as I have been since 1999. I appeared before this board and the planning board in Summit, as well as many other boards.
Great. I imagine the board would like to accept your credentials once again.
Will, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
And maybe provide a bit of assistance to Mr. Weber here, if you have this information on it.
Sure. I just looked at it today, this map, to
Oh,
double check.
wait a minute.
We'll make
Oh.
sure we have the correct one.
We found it.
My reading of it, and Mr. Snakis, I'm sure can correct me or affirm, it goes just past the subject property to the school and the aquatic center property. So it's a little hard to see in here, but it's Ashwood.
You're making a triangle or a square where the property in question is?
Yes, I'm sure the board has a little trouble seeing that, but
I'm gonna pass it around.
yes, okay, there you go.
If I can,
You may. Should we enter that as an exhibit?
I suppose
Or
so.
A5, because we did not mark as exhibits the quotations or the contractor's quotes, as
Okay.
A3 and A4.
Okay. Are you following that,
Okay.
Stephanie? A3 and A4 are the two contractors' quotes.
And do this as well for
Okay. And this is A5. This is an historic preservation districts map dated May 31st, 2018, with some hand notation identifying the subject property on that map, located in the Deantown district. Good luck to your eyesight.
Well, okay.
Chairman, I would confirm.
You confirm. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Mr. Sykes.
It's probably not going to be helpful. I have on the Dropbox on my phone 1990 narrative descriptions of the historic districts in Summit. So these districts go back well before 2018. And there's a long description of the significance of Deantown and the very prolific Dean family that settled it. But I
Mr.
can't
Weber.
produce that in anything useful.
Let's ask Mr. Weber, and perhaps his professionals, could you characterize the Deantown district? What would you include as these notable attributes of the Deantown district that together comprise this feeling of community and value that they're
If
trying
I
to
could,
establish?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Toth, board members, that is beyond my ability, it's beyond the scope of this application. That is an exercise, I think, that is best reserved for the Historic Preservation Commission in its presentation to the planning board, and then for the common council. That is not a simple exercise for us. As I've indicated, it goes from Salerno Dwayne to the old Stevens Miller to the community pool to houses in between, and as a result, is not something that is easily settled as having a particular character.
So then I must defer to Mr. Snykes and his firm Burgess Associates, who has their fingerprints all over planning issues here in the city of Summit. Is there anything you would offer as a representation to the Deantown district, a description, common characteristics, anything you would feel comfortable citing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in fact, I remember reading something about that Deantown district itself. I didn't want to, okay. As was mentioned, it's attributable to the Dean family. It's one of the 12 historic districts. But I read something more specific, and I'm sorry if I didn't underline exactly where it was. But it did talk about the size of the property, the obvious nature of the 6,000 square foot lots that are in the area were a result of some of the working neighborhoods that these were. It's unique to Summit. And it was all related to a manufacturing facility that I believe was in this area as well. They were all sort of employees or workers associated with that facility, or that was housing for them within that Deantown area. I'm sorry if I can't put my finger on it right now, but maybe if I can keep paging, I can.
You can keep paging, yeah, I think you
Okay.
can.
And Mr. Snickes, again, I mean, I don't want to be testifying. I do have a number of documents from the HPC in my Dropbox, including an original list of historic structures, apparently from 2000, that seems to include 90 Ashwood on it. And I can't speak to the provenance of that, so if the, is that an
present-
appendix to the report, to the master plan in
What I can
2000?
do is, at that point, I have the excerpt from the 2000 master plan,
Okay,
and that has Appendix A, so we can distribute that. And perhaps my eyes didn't see it, but I looked at it a couple of times.
and again, I can't speak to the provenance of what I got, and I no longer remember where I got it.
If I may approach,
You may.
what I'm presenting is the excerpt from the 2000 master plan with Appendix A, City of Summit Historic Sites.
All right, let's see here. Organized alphabetically by street. This is Ashwood. Ashwood's on the top. I don't see 90 Ashwood or any Ashwood actually address listed. On Appendix A, City of Summit individual historic sites listed.
Okay.
It might have been an early inventory.
There were sites and there were buildings at one point, and perhaps there was more than one list.
Yeah, maybe we couldn't
Well, we
And
have
the-
the
the
current
list-
list
yeah.
from the Historic Preservation
Okay.
website. And the current list mirrors that of
Okay.
the master plan.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I downloaded it from the website as well.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. And a question I asked Mr. Ball earlier today is, we didn't have a president or some other notable historical figure spend a night there at the structure. So we're comfortable that listing of historic properties is suitably excluding 90 Ashwood Avenue? To the best of your knowledge.
To me.
To you, yes.
The
Woodrow
Pharaoh-
Wilson didn't spend a night there or something? No.
Well, I'm sure that the predecessors in title considered themselves significant, and the DiPieros.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions about Deantown? And I'm sure it'll be matter for discussion and deliberations, but anything, anyone would like to know more about the Deantown district? Wally, anything? No, the wheels are spinning over there, I see it.
I'm pulling it up online as you're all talking, so I'm
Okay.
getting caught up.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Okay. Mr. Weber, then we'll let you guide some of the question here.
Then, at this point, we've presented the testimony of Mr. Menza with regard to his examination of the existing building, determination that it, based on his contractors, would be excessively expensive to maintain it. He's brought the structural engineer in to provide the testimony in support of that conclusion. If it's appropriate, I would ask whether or not the board's members would be willing, with the chair's permission, to share their views with regard to the preservation of 90 Ashwood, the existing structure.
It's an interesting request. Is it appropriate for the board to share their?
To the extent the board would like to chime in on whether it presents an absolute bar to proceeding with the application, it can, or it could just ask the applicant to continue with the presentation and see where we end up.
How would you constitute, just out of curiosity, the remaining testimony before we were to ask that question? I don't have any objection to asking that question. I just would like to know whether you think it's appropriate to hear further testimony or to present that question now.
At the continuation of the testimony, we will recall Mr. Menza to talk about the proposed development, and we'll have the civil engineer talk about the proposed development, with Mr. Greigel talking about the proposed development, all of which hinges on the demolition of the existing structure.
Okay, so then it would appear that now is the appropriate time to present that question to the board, if you are so inclined, to offer some perspective on the historic structure, and historic not in a formal designated sense by the City of Summit, the Historic Preservation Commission, or any other entity, but any reflection you'd like to offer for the applicant. You're not being compelled to do so.
Well, let me ask a question. We're not being asked for permission to tear down the house, right?
That's correct. They can get a demo
Yeah,
permit.
yeah.
There's no land use constraints that prohibit them from obtaining a demolition permit. It's just that when this application was brought in, HPC had indicated, and when we asked for the adjournment so that the board could have further information, it seemed appropriate so that it's a fully informed decision by the board.
So let me ask Mr. Ball, how do you feel about personal feelings about tearing down this house influencing our evaluation of what we're really being asked to do is evaluate the variances?
I don't quite understand your question.
Well, I guess I'm trying to say, does it matter? Would it be appropriate for us to vote no on the variances just because we don't like the idea of tearing down the house?
So it is a factor, right? There is some semblance of historic, it's not a, yes, yeah, good word. Historic character on the site that could be viewed as a benefit, that if the applicants were to try to maintain it on the property, that could add to the positive criteria of the application. But it's, like they've represented, they could go get a demolition permit and it could be removed, and then they could present an application without that aspect of, you know, it even weighing in. So it is something that could factor in. It's not necessarily something that has to factor in.
Because they could have done that before they even came here.
Yes.
And that's one of the
But-
points too. Mr. Menza's, I'm sorry, Mr. Vice Chairman.
But I think we all know what we would have said had they done that.
Shame.
We would have been all over them. So let's
So
be
if they-
honest
if
about
they'd
it.
gotten a
that-
permit to
so
tear
if
it
they'd
down?
gotten a
If they had
permit
turned
and
it
had come in with it torn down and HBC sending this in and all that, you know what we all would have said. They would have been at a significant disadvantage.
And Mr. Menza, as he's indicated in his application, he has, when it's possible, preserved older homes. So it's something where he looked at this one, says, I can't preserve it, I'm bringing the application in. But he's also, to the extent he'll be in front of the board, as Mr. Vice Chairman indicates, it's appropriate. And he's aware that this board has looked at applicants who have gone ahead and done that. And it is not the kind of good faith effort that he's making with this board.
So maybe I'll begin, and you can speak, not speak, agree, disagree, if you choose to offer commentary.
Before you do that, can I ask one question?
Just one more, Joe.
County of Union reviewed this.
It did.
It was reviewed by the Department of Economic Development, which I think has historic preservation under it as well. Did they have any input or impact? Was there a hearing on this, or was this just a letter submitted and sent, and they sent back the?
It's an approval letter.
Yes, I know, but
So
was
the,
it based on a hearing or based on just documents submitted?
When the application is filed with the county planning board, you submit two copies of the application that's pending before the Board of Adjustment, as well as 2 copies of the county's own application form. All plans are also submitted to the county, and the county then turns them over. To the extent the property is on a county road, then the county will look at it in terms of traffic and stormwater facilities. For a subdivision, they will look at all subdivisions to determine whether or not they are affecting county traffic or county stormwater. Under the 1948 Constitution, the municipality's right to control their own land use and not the county's is enshrined in that 1948 Constitution.
So historic preservation would not have seen this?
No, they would not. They might have, but it's...
Well, I figured if they'd seen it, maybe they had something to say about it. Being Dean Town and historic, et cetera, I thought maybe they might give me an out, but they didn't. Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful for local control, so that decision will largely rest with us today. So do us proud, Joe, in your deliberations. In terms of commentary, my perspective is when I look at these types of applications, and yes, thank you, Mr. Menza, for preserving the property to give us even the opportunity to opine on this situation. Oftentimes, we are not given that opportunity, despite the condition of the property and your professional judgment, so thank you for that opportunity. I look both back and forward, and that is the decision before the board today is historic preservation is an element of the factors we will weigh for positive and negative criteria, but I'm interested and excited to hear from our planner, from civil engineering, to the future use and the way that this particular property will contribute to the intent of the master plan, the DRO, its usability in the community. So there's a weighing to be done for me personally, the comments of the Historic Preservation Commission, this historic character of the property, and it not being able to be preserved is not in itself debilitating or preventing me from fairly considering the application. And I would offer that as, again, my personal reflection, not representative of the board, but if anyone would care to add to that, disagree with it, you're certainly welcome to.
Well, I've probably shown my hand. So I do come at this from 30 years of historic preservation. And there is no building in the city of Summit that is safe from being torn down on a simple demolition permit without review, including those that are on the National Register of Historic Places. So I don't see that as dispositive one way or the other. Certainly, this building, if not significant, is at least notable. It's got some architectural details that are almost nowhere else in the neighborhood. I would find it very difficult to say that the positive impact a restored property has on the neighborhood. If not by this owner, then by an owner who was willing to do it, would not outweigh the, would not outweigh the negative criteria. That sentence got too long. And I don't know how to fold this in, so tell me, Andy, if I cannot. But I certainly see a bit of economic justice in here, in that older houses in what are considered more prosperous sides of Summit are typically restored. And yes, you have done that over on, come on. Oak Ridge. Thank you, Oak Ridge. And there's almost a sense that East Summit, everything rolls down the hill to East Summit. I don't know how we crank that into it. But it would be very difficult for me to approve this application. Thank you.
Would care to offer an opinion? You're not, again, not being compelled to do so.
Yeah, I would. I want to thank you for considering HPC's comments and putting a pause on the application. I also commend HPC for wanting to preserve the nature of all aspects of Summit. That being said, this is a board and HPC is an advisory committee, so I think in just the sake of efficiency, it would be nice to move on and listen to what is planned to go there and get a sense of whether this is a good project or not on the merits. So I would say it's advisory. We've heard what we need to hear, and I'd be more than willing to just move forward. But that's me.
Anyone else? Mr. Weber, did that give you a little deeper insight? Did your crystal ball clarify it all?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman. We're going to proceed with the application. I would ask that Mr. Michael Menza be recalled to the stand to provide testimony in this matter. Mr. Menza, I have up on the screen the proposed streetscape showing the perspective of the proposed homes that are presented here before the board. And can you describe those for the board and what this perspective, which is not to scale, but is subjective and just gives an idea for the board of what this will look like. Can you describe what's proposed here?
Sure. What we did, by the way, in Summit, over the past 30 years, we've built approximately 40 homes in Summit itself. We have done renovation also and preserved certain homes. Mrs. Toth on 160 Oak Ridge Avenue was one example where we had a two-lot subdivision. We've had several others in Summit. The key difference on this is the structure itself, the integrity of the structure. With those homes that we have preserved, we had a sound foundation system, a sound structural system. This house, 90 Ashwood, is in extremely poor condition. And so I just wanted to make that comment. Moving forward to these homes here, we chose a craftsman style, gable peaks in the front. We have board on batten peaks, clapboard siding. We have a stone veneer around the foundations. Front porches on them, 2 columns on each of the front porches. Try to make them as aesthetically pleasing architecturally as possible.
And these are two-family homes, each with a single-car garage and with an entrance on the side of the structure. Is that correct?
It's not, no, it's a two-car, I'm sorry, a single-car garage. And the entrance is on the front, but it's set back with the front porch by several feet. Enough if someone wanted to have a chair out front or so, to sit on the porch, they could do so.
And then on the right-hand side of the same structure is the other dwelling unit. So you have two dwelling units in one building.
That's correct. We wanted to keep the doors separated from the two, and have the porches independent of each other.
And if the board were to approve this application, the construction would be substantially similar to that which is shown here?
It would be.
And you've made representations as to the quality of the materials that you will be using, and do you stand by that representation?
I do.
And then looking through the elevations, and with regard to the elevations, these are provided with an objective view, and by that I mean that this is designed to provide, and you will provide scale drawings at the time that construction permit is put through. It was your office that prepared these plans?
It was.
And you'll be providing scale drawings by an architect
Right.
at the time, if the board approves the application, this is filed with the construction office.
That is correct.
And by an elevation, what you're showing here is an objective, identifiable, and measurable description of the property.
It is.
And this is the front elevation of one of the structures?
Yes.
And here's the left elevation of that structure?
That's correct.
And here at the bottom, you can see the change in grade. And by the fact that you have the change in grade, when we go to Krista Anderson's comments in a couple of seconds, you'll indicate that there's a variance associated with regard to the number of stories. And the reason that there's a variance associated with the number of stories is that you have sufficient exposure at the basement, that the basement is now constituting a story above grade. Because it now constitutes a story above grade, it is also included in floor area ratio. And as a result, although this was originally designed to stay within the 35% FAR standard in the R6, it's a 35%, not 25% in the R6. Nonetheless, when you add the basement in, it increases it. Krista Anderson's comments had indicated if you remove it, you get back to around the 35%, which was the original design. Is that a fair statement of what your intention was?
It is.
And you're showing here a deck that's off the back of the property. And that deck, does that have any stairwell or stairway down to the ground?
It does not. It's accessed solely from the interior of the unit.
And what's going to be underneath it?
We'll have some form of stone, paving stones or flagstones underneath it.
And then going to the right elevation, we see the same change in grade. That again created the number of stories and therefore created the increase in the floor area ratio. Is that fair?
That's correct.
And here's the rear elevation. This rear elevation is facing the community pool parking lot and the Board of Ed parking lot.
It is.
And how far is this elevation from the rear lot line?
So it's to the back of our property, it's 80 feet. And then there's municipal-owned property, which Mr. Scott would know the exact number on. I believe it's around 25 foot of wooded area that's municipal-owned. So to the pavement itself, it's 80 foot of our rear yard, and then approximately another 25 foot of municipal-owned property to the parking lot.
And here's the first floor plan that's shown, and that shows the one-car garage with the entranceway, with the family room and the deck.
Yes.
And again, you have the second floor plan.
That's correct.
And how many bedrooms are proposed?
There's 3 bedrooms on this level.
And you've also included a plan of the basement. And can you describe what's proposed in the basement area?
It's a rec room, a storage closet, and a bathroom.
And is it typical for construction in the city of Summit to have a recreational room in the basement?
I would say so. Most of the newer duplex units have some form of finished basement.
And then what is shown here, and we're moving a little bit, if I can, Mr. Chairman, into the neighborhood pattern, but you have prepared a neighborhood pattern as part of your submission to the Board of Adjustment as part of the application. I'm not sure, this was provided as part of the application, but I want to make sure that we don't have to mark it at this point as a separate exhibit.
It was included in the,
That is for Mr. Ball.
That was submitted, right? And we have it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's fine to proceed.
So in relation to that, you have various colors that are shown on there. And with regard to the properties that are multifamily dwellings, are those indicated with triangles?
they are. I had confirmed this with Mr. O'Connor at the tax assessor's office, and I believe in Krista Anderson's review, she had confirmed that to be accurate.
So when we look at those triangles, we see that the red triangles on lots 1, 2, 3, and 5, block 4204 are two-family homes.
That's correct.
And then with regard to lot 29, which is on the same side of the property as the property in question, that's a three-family home.
It is.
That's also been included as part of the lot averaging, hasn't it? So that when the lot averaging was done, and as part of a when you're doing a subdivision, what they do, what the ordinance requires, and that they ask you to do, is to average the lots. 3 on one side, 3 across the street, stop where it makes sense to stop. In other words, the school, because that's just going to throw the calculation off. So in terms of the calculations of the lot area that was done, it came up to around 7,041 square feet in this R6 zone. The point that Mr. Menza is making is that the third lot, 27, 28, 29, 29 was included in that lot area, which elevated this to 7,000, but there's 3 dwelling units on that. So that, for purposes of understanding the 7,041 square feet, it's asked that the board take consideration of the fact that that is, in effect, 3 dwelling units. And then with regard to going to the south on Ashwood Avenue, you start to see that the single-family residential aspect of that predominates. Is that fair?
Yes.
And with regard to this property, and I think if we can find the aerial photo, you can see that this property acts as a peninsula. And so when we take a look at the aerial photo that was included as part of the package by Mr. Snickus, you can see here that you have the newly constructed entrance and exit access way for the school and for the community pool. I don't know the date of that. I think it's around, Mr. Steiner, it's around 6 to 10 years ago they redid that, if you recall.
When they redid the pool?
Not the pool, but they redid the entranceway.
I don't think it's that long.
And, okay. But they've redone that in order to improve the access, provide the queuing, and you can see the community pool behind it. So this property is in effect a peninsula, and as a result, it's important that there be sufficient reinvestment in connection with this property that protects the properties that that Mr. Menza was referring to as part of his neighborhood description. I should have put the two together. So when we look at that exhibit there, we see that the property in question is important as a, if you will, a linchpin to protect the remaining properties that move to the north along Ashwood Avenue. Is that a fair statement, Mr. Menza?
Yes.
All right. If I can draw then your attention to the comments of Krista Anderson. And because Mr. Menza is experienced with construction, as indicating his constructed over 30 homes in the city of Summit, I would ask that the board permit us to continue with this and allow him to provide testimony in support of the application. We're still going to have the civil engineer, and we're still going to have the planner, but we're taking advantage of his experience.
Please, yes.
Do you have the report up on the screen?
No, I also have a copy. If I could draw your attention to the comments of Krista Anderson dated November 11th, 2022, which are up on the screen now. I don't know if they are large enough for the board members to see them. I can certainly
But
zoom
we
in a
can-
bit.
But we have them.
But we have.
Very good. So I'm asking you to look at the November 11th, 2022 plan of Chris Anderson. Are you familiar with it?
I am.
Okay, if I could draw your attention to the proposed subdivision, indicating as I pointed out, that the average lot area is 7,104 square feet, not the 7,141 that I had indicated, and lot widths of 75 and 75, where in the R6 zone, it's 60 feet, linear feet for lot width, and 6,000 square feet for the lot area. The properties in question, the board should recognize, this is a 24,000 square foot lot.
23,790 square foot.
So it's almost 24.
Almost 24,000.
And as a result, in the R6 zone, the density would be approximately 1 unit per 6,000 square feet, or 4 units per 24,000 square feet.
Correct.
In terms of the lot numbers, that has already been established with the tax assessor. And Krista Anderson indicates her concurrence with the neighborhood pattern that we just looked at previously. Now, Ms. Anderson, as proposed lot 2601, and when you're looking at the lots, that would be the lot on the right-hand side, has indicated that there is 3 stories, and that your building height is 38.48 feet, where 35 feet is permitted.
That's correct.
And with regard to that, you need variances associated with the 3 stories and the building height.
That's correct. Yeah, due to the slope of the property, the existing house right now, and my engineer could elaborate it further, would be considered a story above grade.
When she talks about lot number 2601, that's the lot that's on the right-hand side, correct? So if I can just diverge from this report of Chris Anderson and go to a site plan, just so the board can see where lot 2601 is. And of course, it's at the beginning of the plans.
Where's Mrs. Alfonso when you meet her?
So now we're looking at the plans that have been provided to the board. And you can see here that 2601 is on the right-hand side, new lot 2601. And then on the left-hand side is new lot 2602. And these are the numbers that have been confirmed by the tax assessor, correct?
That's correct.
So we're talking about 2601 at this point. So if you could refer again to Krista Anderson's comments indicating the variances associated with this one in terms of the number of stories, you touched upon that, the building height, 38 feet, where 35 is permitted, and then, what's the other one? Building coverage, correct?
Yes.
And with regard to the building coverage, she makes an observation that the rear deck, and because the rear deck is 12 inches above the grade, it is not excluded from building coverage, but it is included in building coverage, so that the rear deck constitutes a certain percentage of the building coverage. How much? And if 3.8% is accurate?
3.8%.
So that when you therefore take a look at the building coverage, you would have to take the 3.8 off the 25 that's permitted, where 20% is permitted in this zone. So that brings it closer to the 20%, is that fair?
That's correct, yes.
And one of the points that was raised by the planning report, and I think that would be the appropriate time, in talking about the height variance, Mr. Snickis points out that you're coming within, I think, 6 inches of requiring a height variance that is 10% or 10 feet above that permitted. So if you're over 10, if you're at 10% over what's permitted, it trips into a D variance. So as a result, we have a floor area ratio variance, we have a use variance associated because two-family homes are not permitted in the R6 zone, and then you would have this D height variance. And Mr. Snickis and his report has said, are you sure that you're going to not end up in a situation where the 0.12 inches less than the 10% maximum is going to be met? Or do you just want to ask the board at this point to amend the application to grant you that height variance in the nature of a D variance, so to the extent that there is a overage?
A little flexibility in that. It is tight. It's been here many times before with height, achieving height. I'd feel a little comfortable if we did have a little flexibility on it. If not, I'll...
As a result, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I would ask to amend the application to allow for the comfort of having a 1-foot deviation over the
12 inches would be more than enough.
12 inches, thank you, over that which would otherwise be a C variance, moving that into a D variance.
Okay. Any objections, Andy? Okay.
And then with regard to the highest to lowest, in terms of the plans that have been presented, if we look at 2601, because we're dealing with this change in grade, the fact that we've had to manage this has triggered a result where for 2601, you're going to end up in a situation where your highest to lowest is at 40.9 feet. As a result, you're allowed to go to 40 feet. However, given the new grade, which is somewhat of an excavation, your roof ridge is going to be higher than the permitted 40 feet. To the extent that that requires a variance, we're asking for a variance, if I can, Mr. Chairman, to amend the application to include that additional 1 foot.
Andy, you following?
I missed that last part, 1 foot for...
In other words, for lot 2601, it's not just the average grade building height. So in other words, building height is measured under the DRO from the grade, the existing grade, and then you measure the roof, and that we're at the 38 plus, so 35 is permitted. And that's taking the whole picture around. There's also a requirement that once it's constructed, to the extent that you have a lowest portion, the highest portion, no matter where they're related to each other, you can only be 5 feet over the permitted 35 feet. When the calculations are run here, and this is, again, thanks to Mr. Snickis and to Ms. Anderson for scrutinizing the application, we end up with a 40.9. Because we're at 40.9, we're 0.92 feet over that's permitted, and as a result, we're asking for a variance due to the change in grade, the topography, that we're at 0.92 feet over. So we're asking for a variance associated with that.
40.92?
Correct.
Okay.
And we're just kind of considering D variances like it's Christmas here. Any of this, causing you concern?
Well, that's not a D variance.
Oh, sorry, that may not be a D variance.
That's a C.
Thank you for the clarification.
And the issue there is the applicant needs to provide justification. I think they need to do the D variance justification. Can the site, typically the board's heard this before, can the site accommodate it? Or are there other external circumstances that require it? And you're probably going to hear the grade change issue on the discussion.
Thank you.
That's only my speculation.
Don't spoil it for us.
Then when we go through lot 2602, Mr. Menza, and I can shorten this a little bit, they tend to mirror each other. So again, we're triggering an FAR and a 3 stories and a building coverage associated with the deck, The FAR is a result that the basement is now a story above grade due to the change in grade. The numbers are a little bit different, but the same discussion that we've been having with Mr. Menza would apply to that aspect. There is no average height that exceeds by 10%, and there is no highest to lowest that applies because that property is a little bit more level than the 2601. And 2602 again is the property on the left-hand side.
So the only relief necessary is 26.01 for height
Yes.
overall.
And those are both aspects that indicating the 10%. The plans were drawn, but they are very tight. So this was really something that was proposed in order to provide that flexibility, which would not require the applicant, if the board approves the application, to come back to the board. The 22-foot lot width, can you explain why we're doing that, Mr. Menza? And let me please expand this.
Did you mean driveway width?
Driveway.
What did I say, lot width?
Yeah, driveway. It's a long night already.
The driveway width, is that 22 feet? Krista points out that 20 feet is permitted.
Correct. Yes, it's, we're looking for a little bit of breathing room. Considering Ashwood Avenue is, it's a busy road during rush hour, school traffic. With cars, with having 2 cars in the driveway, we felt that having an additional 2 feet would just help with maneuverability, backing out onto Ashwood Avenue.
Then with regard to the roof pitch, you're at 4.5 over 12, where 6 over 12 is required. And what does that mean, 6 over 12, 4.5 over 12? What does that mean?
That's the pitch of the roof.
So you go up 6 inches when you're flat 12?
Correct.
So that's a more steep roof if you're 6 over 12?
Yes,
And 4.5 is less steep.
that's correct.
And so, in looking at the structure, why didn't you do is it because of the fact you were bumping into the height that you kept it at the 4?
We could comply with the 6 on 12. It changes the roof line. In my opinion, this is, it has more aesthetic architectural flair to it than having a 6 on 12 where we can comply with the ordinance, but we'd have to clip the roofs and present
So,
this to
in
the
other
board.
words, what your testimony is that you looked at keeping it at a 6 over 12, but you found that that would not be aesthetically pleasing, and therefore contrary to the design that you're proposing.
That would be a fair statement, yes.
And is this what you've handed me, a diagram showing the 6 over 12 that you were considering as part of your feasibility study for the property?
Yes. These are 2 copies, so that's just a larger scale.
Are these the same?
They're the same.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
You may. Are these incorporated in the packet, or we?
These are not incorporated in the packet.
So this is A6, I think we're up to. And how would you characterize this, Mr. Weber? I want to do it justice.
A design study as to 6 over 12.
Okay, thank you. And Ed, why are there, as an element of the DRO, call-outs for roof pitch? Is it a aesthetic consideration? Why is that important?
Yeah, the intent of that provision in the ordinance is really to provide an angle to the roof line such that it adds aesthetics to that roof. Because typically when you go to a more shallower pitch, less steep, you have a flatter roof condition, less impact of that roof architecturally. Many consider a roof sort of a hat on a building, and it doesn't necessarily have the same presence if it's not a 6 on 12. I think that's generally the sense that I got for that provision. I will point out, and I was going to offer this as a question, I think some of your roof lines are over. They're actually 6 on 12 on the front gables that face the street, if I'm not mistaken. It's just really on the front to back roof line, correct? Correct. That are 4.5 on top.
Okay, thank you.
And then Krista Anderson makes the point that a grading plan will be required prior to construction of each new two-family dwelling. We're subject to that and would agree with that. Mr. Menz, if I can draw your attention to the comments of Mr. Linson. Have you had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Linson with regard to the proposed development?
I did. I met with Mr. Winson in the field on November 22nd and reviewed the landscape plan and sought his comments on it. Okay, if we can pull up the latest plan.
Is there a separate landscaping plan?
No, we have it combined.
Okay.
Do you have the new one, Jim? The one that Bill sent over?
I don't have that, but in
Okay,
terms of...
If we can stop here then.
Mhm.
Okay, Bill Scott is going to put the revisions up on the easel.
And do those revisions deal with the landscaping, which is the subject of the discussion that we're managing right now?
Yes, yes.
And this has not been entered into evidence yet.
It is not.
So what is going to happen with Mr. Scott's testimony is that he has responded to the comments of Dipti Sheth. Ordinarily, those comments would be by narrative. In anticipation of this hearing, Mr. Scott actually went ahead and has begun to make those changes. So this is an exhibit. It is really intended as a response to Dipti Sheth rather than us just doing it by narrative. It's been done by diagram. So as a
These are engineering drawings, sorry, just to characterize.
Yes, these are the engineering drawings, and as a result, they are intended to be submitted post, if the board approves the application, post-approval for her review and approval. It's just that Mr. Scott went ahead and jumped to it.
So this is A7, just for reference. Stephanie, let's make sure we get copies of all this when the dust settles.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Did they identify the date of the revised drawing?
They haven't yet. Mr. Weber will, I'm sure. Thank you very much.
These bear a date of January 18th, 2023. Thank you, Mr. Snickers.
And then just for clarity, what's on the screen is, say, the original, and what's
Those are
on
the
the
original.
board is the updated.
Correct. What is on the screen is issued August 24th, 2022.
And Leah, we're going to talk about Forrester's report now. So this is landscaping. This might be things that are of interest to you.
I actually have my questions answered.
Okay. Wonderful. If you need to, though, shift over. If you want to see these, you're welcome to as well. Thank you.
So, Mr. Menza, in referring to the plans that have been marked as A7, intended as response to the comments of Collier's Engineering, do you show a change in the landscaping that is proposed between August 24th and 1/18/2023?
We do. So do you want me to just go through what the...
Just go through the new one,
Okay.
because that is what's being proposed.
Okay. So the first change was in the species of the arborvitae. We had specified American arborvitae, and we changed that based on Mr. Winston's comments to giant green arborvitae, and increased the height on some of these shrubs from 5 to 6 foot to 6 to 8 foot in height. We added a boundary of arborvitae along the border of the school property. This is wooded right now, but it's a little bit scraggly. There's gaps, particularly in the back end of the property, so this,
And you're talking about the Board of Ed property, when you're
Board of Ed.
talking about the property to the right of the 2601.
correct. Along the back, Mr. Wilson suggested on some Norway spruce trees. So we have those spaced at 15 foot on center. They're 10 to 12 foot tall on installation. And there's 6 of them along the back. This boundary.
A Norway spruce, how big does a Norway spruce get, and how wide of a diameter does it finally grow into? If you know.
I don't know offhand.
But they're big trees, if I say that they're big trees that will grow over 80 feet,
Correct.
yes. And so the planting that's proposed, they will fill in on each other?
They should, yes. That's
And-
why the spacing of 15 foot. Along the front, there was a comment from the planner on the species of the tree, which we had dogwood, American dogwoods, and they were changed to sunset maple trees.
And if I were to report that if the board approves the application, would you be willing to agree to a condition that any landscaping plan would remain subject to the approval of John Linson?
I would. There will be foundation plantings. We do that on all of our homes. We really didn't come about a foundation plan this early, but it would be a mixture of inkberry, fernies, verbenum, or like what?
We have great faith in Mr. Linson, so it seems that you have a productive back and forth, and we've noted a condition, again, subject to the approval of the board, that a landscaping plan would be submitted for his review and approval. So I
Thank
don't know
you,
if there's
Mr.
any
Chairman.
specific landscaping questions, but
I have one quickie.
Yes.
How many trees are you planning that, he talks about the fact that you have to get removal permits. How many are being removed?
That's a good point. If I can have the civil engineer address that specifically, and we'll be calling him to get
Okay, we'll
testimony.
get it at that point. And are we replacing a similar number?
Again, I'll let the
Okay.
civil engineer address that.
Because
Mr. Linson did
you
make
may like the landscaping plan, but if we're not replacing all the trees, I think we have a problem.
sorry, Mr. Menzel, you were saying?
And Mr. Linson did have concern with the health of the trees in this area here.
When you say here, where is here, on which lot?
26.
As shown on page 2 of the plan, would be a 30 and a 36-inch tree.
If we can just catch up for a second, hold on a second, Mr. Menza. And now, because there's no substantial changes between this sheet and the revised sheet, would you refer to that which is on the screen as to the trees that are being removed?
Yes, it would be to the right of the house, these two trees here.
And you have a 30-inch, a 36-inch that are adjacent to the house, and those trees are scheduled to be removed?
Yes.
And then at the back by the shop, which looks like a, I'm
And
not
that's
sure what it
a
looks like.
cedar. That one is, that's a scraggly tree.
And that's a 12-inch cedar.
One of these trees fell down on its own recently. I'm not sure if it was a 10-inch or the 15-inch, but that's laying on its side right now.
And then around, as you're describing that, on what will be, if the board approves the application, lot 2601, you have a 6-inch, a 6-inch, a 15-inch, and a 10-inch, and another 10-inch that are alongside the green area by the Board of Ed property. And those are all scheduled to be removed. And then in front of the two-family dwelling, which is the existing dwelling, you have a 12-inch tree. And then in the street, because of the relocation of the driveway, you have a 12-inch street tree that's being removed, together with several 6-inch, 6-inch, 4-inch, and 4-inch trees. Is that fair?
Yes.
Mr. planner, is there any specific direction or encouragement you'd like to offer Mr. Linson in reviewing and approving the final landscape plan?
I think I still want to hear more when we go forward. I think that'll come up in executive session.
Very good. It's certainly something that has occurred before, where there is a specific direction to Mr. Linson as to what he's looking for in terms of his review of any landscape plan. Mr. Snickes, I didn't know if you wanted to, without going to the civil engineer or the planner, have any questions of Mr. Menza as a builder and an applicant with regard to your report. And certainly, Ms. Sheth, the same opportunity is offered here.
Chairman, if that's okay? Please. Thank you. Just some questions regarding it. It seems that you're not going to have an architect, correct? I think what you have is you sort of led the applicant through the architectural plans that are proposed, correct?
That's correct. And you're not, you're having an architect, if the board approves the
If the board
application.
approves it, we will have the plans drawn by an architect.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm asking the right witness. With regard to building width, the overall width of each unit is about 25 feet?
That's correct.
Okay, so therefore, in your building opinion, I guess, as a builder, is there anything on this building, and I recognize, I see what was proffered before with regard to the basement area itself, lending itself to some of the FAR, but on the upper floors of the building, when a board reviews FAR, is there anything of excess within the building that has any ability to shrink, or is this sort of the minimum that's needed for this three-bedroom proposal?
And Mr. Snickes, I brought up on the screen the second floor plan.
We designed the second floor with 3 bedrooms as opposed to a 4-bedroom layout. And in doing so, there were walk-in closets which, with each of the bedrooms, which we thought was a nice feature in today's design. The question is, could we shrink it? We could pull the back of the house in if we had to. I'd prefer, if we could, to stay with this design. I think it, would be an attractive design with today's buyer.
Sort of the needs of a modern family.
Yes.
Looking at the basement floor plan of the building, I noticed that, and I only offer this and see if the board has any issue with this, so I offer it through the board. I noticed you have a shower on that lower level. Obviously, there's no kitchen on that lower level, but the shower itself, is that something of an amenity you're looking to provide? Sometimes I've seen applications where we get concerned about that being rented out, that lower space, if it has a shower. Obviously, it doesn't have a kitchen, so it doesn't qualify as an extra unit. But I wanted to see if the board had any issue with that.
Yeah, we're planning to put steam showers in the basement, figuring if there was exercise equipment or workout, someone would have the ability to shower.
Okay, that's how you see it being used. Okay, thank you. With regard to the calculations that Krista did, I'm not sure if you're going to raise this with the engineer that's going to be providing testimony. She gave a calculation of 50.99 as the overall FAR with the basement. Is there any exception to that, or does that seem to be accurate?
If I could have a moment.
Okay. I didn't know if you had your engineer testifying to that or not. I just wanted that for the board's information. I think Krista offered it from her calculations, but I'm not sure if it's confirmed.
You know, Mr. Snickes and Mr. Chair members, we routinely defer to Krista
She's been doing
Anderson's
it for so long.
calculations.
I figured that was easy for you to respond to. Just wanted that for the purpose of the variance.
In fact, when I went back to look at the 2000 master plan, I saw Krista Anderson's name there. Sure.
Okay, I believe we're below that 50%, but I'd prefer if the engineer can address that comment. He just went through the update. Huh?
Did you hear my comment was that we defer to Krista Anderson's calculations?
Oh, no.
Yeah, so routinely, and we find that acceptable. The board is comfortable with that number. And when she points out that when you exclude the basement, it brings you down to the 35.69, which is consistent with what you were targeting when you were designing this property to stay within the FAR. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
Okay, my other question regarding architecture is just that it seems that on the first floor you have 9-foot ceilings and 8-foot ceilings on the upper floors.
That is correct.
What is the purpose for that? And I just wanted that to be offered within, and I know your planner will address the issue of the height variance, but just what does that offer to the overall building?
We were talking before about modern family stay. The 9-foot is something that we've been building, not just we, but most of the building community for the past 25 years or so. A little bit extra height for an 8-foot ceiling. It seems to be very desirable. People today looking for housing, and that's
More, I'm following you to that lower space.
it does.
Seems like you've addressed my other questions, and thank you for the revisions to the landscape plan. I think the rest of my questions I would direct to your engineer. Thank you.
Dipti, anything you'd like to ask here?
Clarification on the plans.
Okay.
Okay, so just so I understand, these plans that are provided here, I think this is Exhibit A7, I believe it was. These are revised plans, are they revised or are they continuing to be revised?
They're continuing to be revised.
Okay, thank you, okay. So I will leave my comments for those, yeah. So we will get a chance to review the revised plans.
Absolutely.
From
To
our
the
letter, okay.
If the board approves the
Right.
application, then
Right.
it would be subject to the acceptance of the conditions set forth in your letter.
Got it, okay. And then the other thing was I don't know if this is a question for Mr. Menza, but the garage sizes will comply with the ordinance?
That's correct.
Correct, okay. Yeah. Okay, that was it for me, thank you.
Any questions from the board? For Mr. Menza in this capacity. Leah, did you have any questions for Mr. Menza?
Oh, yes.
If you do, I'll just need you to come up here to the left.
Can I interject?
Up
Yes,
to
you
the
have to
microphone.
come up
Up to
here.
the microphone.
Come here.
Here we go.
Yeah, if I can, with regard to Ms. Miller, her driveway is, at the narrowest point, is 8.48 feet.
Would you mind if we just hear from her briefly? I don't know what property she's from, and if she could just briefly introduce. We'll just ask you to come forward. Maybe we'll just swear her in. If you can. One second, Ms. Miller. We're going to swear you in.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And please state your name, spell your last name.
My name is Leah Miller, M-E-L-L-E-R.
And what is your address? Address, please.
84 Ashwood Avenue.
Great, thank you.
And maybe talking to the microphone, if you don't mind.
So 84 Ashwood, just so we all know, is to the, depending on if you're facing the
left
subject
side.
property, it's to the left side.
Left side.
Okay.
Yeah.
So please, your questions or comments, yes?
So as for now, there is a shared driveway between lot 27 and 26, and there is no easement. Mr. Menza proposed to introduce an easement for the driveway, and my understanding is that the easement is 3 feet. So that was my question. I didn't know when we are going to discuss that, and fortunately it comes up now.
Okay.
So,
Thank you for
yeah.
bringing me up. Thanks for bringing that up. You can grab a seat in the front row if you'd like, but Mr. Menza, Mr. Weber, if you'd like to just
Thank you.
address, thank you, Mr. Weber.
Thank
If
you,
you'd like
Mr.
to
Chairman.
address or comment or,
Yes, what I have up on the screen,
thank you.
and we have paper copies, but this is a proposed 3-foot wide driveway easement benefiting Lot 27, the home of 84 Ashwood, so that, as Mr. Menza was indicating, her 8.48 wide side yard will now be increased to 11.48. It'll be by way of an easement, so there's not land being transferred over, but there will be a driveway easement to her benefit.
Thank you.
And I would suggest that would be A8.
A8 is a description of the proposed easement, is that, sorry, I don't have it in front of me.
Good. And, Mr. Chairman?
You may. A8, 3-foot driveway easement. That's exciting. Okay,
I have nothing further, Mr. Menza.
all right, Mr. Menza, thank you.
I had a-
Grab seat, but
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
we couple questions up here.
Oh my gosh, sorry,
Go ahead.
sorry. Go,
No,
Tom,
sorry.
go.
You answered most of my questions, Mr. Menza and Mr. Weber, but you raised a couple new ones for me. I forget who used this terminology. I think it might have been Mr. Weber, maybe it's Mr. Menza, described the rendering as not to scale, which, you know, normally when we see renderings and things, this is what's being built, so that was a concern. And I think one of you said that the plans are, what they're going to build is substantially similar to the plans. Normally, when we look at things, we're approving this, and that's what we're approving, and it's what's going to be built. So I'm just wondering what is meant by not to scale and substantially similar.
If I can answer that, or go ahead, Mr. Menza, if you
Yeah,
want.
I have scale drawings, which I can hand out, which are identical to what is on the sheet. To put the presentation together, I imported those in. It wasn't exactly to scale, but the plans are to scale. Substantially similar, it would be, I would like to say identical. What you see up there is what I'm going to construct. If there's any deviation at all, it would be something very minor. If it was a house bracket or so in the final designs, but the clapboard, the board on Benton, the stone, the massing, the sizing of it would like to say identical.
But let's
It's
get back to the...
rendering,
And
it's
then
not,
with-
it's not.
And when, if I can, with regard to the rendering, when we look at the picture now, and you see that we have both sides, for architects and preparing elevations, they will not do this, because as soon as you have the depth, you start to lose the ability to have an accurate scale. So in other words, in the construction, this would not be something that a contractor would be able to build under. It is, from your eye perspective, yeah, it makes sense, and this is pretty much what it's going to look like. But in terms of the actual construction, this is what they're looking for. They're looking for the elevation, because this tells them the actual height. This is exactly what they're going to be seeing. This is, by term, it's subjective. You're looking at shadows. You're looking at the fact that we're looking at the back of the house. Because you're looking at the back of the house, you're going to have that declination in the perspective. It's presented here. It will be substantially, what you see here is what you're going to get. But in terms of a contractor, if you handed a contractor this, or a builder, he'd go, I can't build this. What does that mean? Look, the windows go like that.
But in terms of the scale, I mean, we can't see much of the neighboring house there on the left, but that's an accurate representation of what your proposal looks like compared to, say, the house next door. Not that we can see much of it, but...
Is that fair, Mr. Menza?
It is fair.
Okay.
I have 1/8" scale as a condition. I can submit the 1/4" scale, large drawings.
They have the drawings.
If I may, I'd like to add a question with regards to the question that was just presented with regards to the height variance. Is the proposed height substantially similar to what is existing today, and is it consistent with what's on the street today?
Actually, the 90 Ashwood, the existing structure, exceeds the height substantially. This will be lower than 90, than the existing house.
And what about the rest of the block?
The rest of the block, I don't believe that we've done a study, Mr. Greigel, with regard to the height, with regard to the rest of the block. The rest of the block is not as affected by the change in grade that we have here. The change in grade here, and if we take a look at the existing conditions, change in grade here is really what's triggering those height variances. It's not so much that the building itself is going to be excessively high as seen from Ashwood Avenue. It's the fact that it drops off in the back, and because what had happened at one time, the city had in place where you didn't have the existing grade as a standard. They said, you know, whatever you propose. Well, I think, and Mr. Steiner will probably remember this, on Fernwood Road, what happened was that they were exceeding the height. Well, the height was measured from the new grade, 6 feet out, And so the contractor literally built a mountain that he put his house on, so that they had the flat, and so you ended up with this mounded system where they put the house and they said, well, 6 feet out, we're still short. Well, from the street, it was remarkably high. When we look at something like this, it's the existing grade, and I'm trying to find, there we are, is this the wall?
It is.
Okay, here what I have up on the screen is, and this is provided as part of the application package, that's an 8-foot wall that the grade that is existing on the site is 8 feet below the sidewalk at Ashwood Avenue. So, yeah, interesting, but certainly a significant topographical deviation from what is expected. And that's where, in creating these homes, that's triggering the height variances.
From the street elevation, it will look similar to the other homes in terms of height. It's the rear yard where the grade falls off, where we have a walkout basement is triggering the height variance.
Thank you.
This may be for the engineer, but you did mention the driveway that you wanted wider.
22 feet where 20 is permitted.
My question is, we've tried to be consistent around here. Not too long ago, we had two properties on Ashwood down towards Morris Avenue, and I believe they asked for that. I really don't remember what we did, but I remember it being a very contentious discussion with this board about not
I can't recall,
exceeding.
yeah, I can't recall those
So
specific.
I would like to find out before we put this in concrete.
I'm looking at the time, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure you are
You
as
too?
well.
Okay.
Gee.
But I think if you can, and perhaps the civil engineer has some perspective on it, this again, just opine on the suitability of the driveway width as proposed, just to reinforce that, particularly in the context of the character of the surrounding property.
Are there any further questions of Mr. Menza?
I don't see any further questions. I would note also that the happy neighbor has returned likely to her home. So it's just us here, the applicant and the board. So, Mr. Weber, if you'll proceed, I think to...
If I could ask that Mr. Scott be called to the stand to provide testimony in this matter.
And I pass them every day. About a year ago.
All right, if you could raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And please state your name, spell your last name.
William Scott, S-C-O-T-T.
Thank you. Can you briefly describe your background, experience?
Mr. Scott's appeared before the board recently.
Any changes to your credentials since the last time you appeared before the board?
No, thank you.
Welcome back, Mr. Scott. We'll accept your credentials.
Thanks for cutting me off.
10:20 we cut.
Every second counts. All right, very good.
Mr. Scott, are you familiar with the application that's currently pending before the board?
Yes, I prepared these plans.
And you're familiar with the City of Summit and the DRO?
Yes.
All right, can you describe for the board member, Vice Chairman Steiner, the aspect that you consider important with regard to the variance associated with the driveway width?
On this particular street, we are asking for the additional 2 feet to allow ourselves a little more comfort in the maneuverability of the cars. The circulation, unless the cars choose to back in, is going to be a back out onto Ashwood. We are removing site obstructions, existing trees between the curbing and the sidewalk, and replacing them with trees that are set back into the property. So I feel comfortable that we're creating a better site distance, site up Ashwood. But I think that extra 2 feet just allows a little measure of extra comfort.
Would you, Mr. Scott, characterize those additional 2 feet as allowing for safer ingress and egress of vehicles on your property?
Absolutely.
And would it also, in your opinion, encourage the parking of vehicles on the subject property as opposed to on the street? It may not, you may not have an opinion on that response.
The street parking is signed, it's restricted hours, I'm not certain exactly what, I think it has 3 or 4 different times when you're allowed to park on that street, I'm not familiar with exactly what it is. We did create enough depth on the driveway that cars can pull up to the garage door, and you'll still have some maneuverability and some sight distance as the other cars come in and out.
Joe?
I am going to question, you're saying 2 feet at 22 feet. I thought a driveway was only allowed to be 18. Am I correct or incorrect?
15? What do you got?
Yes, this is what we have in our
18?
letter, yes.
Is
as
18.
per the ordinance.
So therefore, we're talking 4 feet here.
Right, our plan indicates 18.
That, I know we never went anywhere near that on Ashwood.
Mr. Weber, what are we missing here?
We're missing Krista Anderson indicating that 20 feet is the maximum permitted.
Yep.
So, and that's in her report of November 11th, 2022. So, we have a question as to what is permitted. And I'm adding that to my list.
Does
of-
Steiner beat Krista? Never.
Krista's never, well, yeah, I mean, so standard driveway width. We'll get that information. I don't believe, Mr. Chairman, we're going to conclude tonight. Because I do know that the board concludes at 10:30, taking testimony.
We prefer to, yes.
Yes. So we have Mr. Scott's testimony, then we have Mr. Greigel's. And if the board would allow us to come back in the next hearing, I believe we could probably conclude this within 45 minutes.
What's up
Because-
next, Stephanie, in the next
Well,
full docket?
so on March 6th, we have 709, and we also have one other applicant on as well. So I don't, maybe we could do it then, and then March 20th is full.
Nothing in February? No.
Mr. Beck's testimony was wonderful, but unfortunately, we're looking at April at this point.
Yeah, it's either April 3rd or April 17th.
Wow.
Well, certainly April 3rd. You're out of town April 3rd? Yes. April 17th? Okay,
April 17th, okay.
all right.
Wow.
And that'll allow us the opportunity to have a landscape plan brought into further focus. The driveway width issue will be attended to. And in terms of the Historic Preservation Commission with regard to Deantown, we can have further understanding of that, so that when the planner comes in, he'll be able to
Okay.
respond to that
Great.
directly.
Thank you.
And if I missed any other,
Maybe let's pause for a second. So for either our planner or engineers or any, aside from the items that Mr. Weber just noted, anything else you'd like to see him and his team investigate prior to the next hearing in April? And if there is something after this session, you're of course welcome to communicate with them.
Just to clarify again, will the revisions be provided to us before the April meeting?
Yes.
For the plans? Okay,
Yep,
all right.
engineering plans to
And
be,
that will be based on the conditions or our letters?
very good.
Okay.
I also just did want to mention that I've been furiously scrolling through our ordinances and did find the driveway provision. It looks like section 35-14.3G1 does confirm that in the R6 zone, 18 feet is the maximum width.
I'm not going to tell Ms. Anderson that you said that.
Somebody tell Krista, I'm not going to.
Okay, anything from the board in terms of, I think Claire, they addressed the HPC related questions. Any other questions you'd like to see Mr. Weber's craft team address in advance of our next meeting on this application? Okay, thank you, Mr. Weber. If anything does come up, we'll make sure to let you know. Andy, sorry, I didn't get to ask you. Anything else kind of?
Nope.
Okay, to address? So
We need a motion.
a motion, yep, a motion, a
So
second
moved.
to, slow down.
Well, I suppose the one point is Mr. Weber waiving the timeframe within which to act.
Yes,
Okay. And without further notice.
I imagine the board would not need further
No,
notice.
we wouldn't for this particular application, the timeframe. So we need a motion. I believe I heard from Mr. Steiner. Did I hear that?
Yes.
Motion for Mr. Steiner, a second?
Second.
Okay. And then we'll want a roll call on that, Stephanie.
Okay. Vice Chairman Steiner?
Yes.
Ms. Newell?
Yes.
Mr. Gonzalez?
Yes.
Mr. Malay?
Yes.
Ms. Toth?
Yes.
Mr. Feskin?
Yes.
And Chairman Sparks?
Yes.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Weber,
Chair.
for respecting our time. That's a rare thing, but we appreciate it. I think you may also have some interest in the resolution for memorialization, so I want to make sure there's time for that as well.
17. Yeah.
Okay, so with that, understanding that we, just as a reminder, we carried 709 Springfield Avenue to March 6th, and we'll hear 90 Ashford again in April. There are two items of business to address this evening. First, resolutions for memorialization. Stephanie, if you want to lead us through that. I think there was a question about who's eligible to vote on it.
I got it cleared.
You got it cleared up? All right,
Yeah.
cool. And thank you.
Okay, so we have 557-565 Morris Avenue as a resolution for memorialization. This is ZB-21-2090. Our eligible voting members are Vice Chairman Steiner, Mr. Loikitz, who's not here this evening, Ms. Toth, Ms. Sager, who's also not here, and Mr. Gonzalez. Would somebody like to move that?
So moved.
Do I get a second?
Second.
I guess I get them over there. Walter does, one of the other.
So moved.
Okay,
You got two people.
We're good. We're good. Let's take it.
okay. So Vice Chairman Steiner,
Yes.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Yes.
Ms. Toth.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries.
Resolution of Mr. Weber, into the Flanagan. Next is,
This was the one that we revised, what, about 4 o'clock this afternoon?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
next is minutes for approval, January 4th.
Okay. Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect.
Hearing none, they're approved. Well, with that, we'll
Okay.
adjourn to this evening's
boy.
meeting. Jay, hope you had a good time. Hope to see you again next time, most importantly. And we'll see everyone Monday, February 6th.
Jay, we didn't put you off.
Didn't leave
did we?
early. You didn't leave
Thank you,
early,
Jay.
which is good.